Okay, in theory, it should work this time. Listen, I never said I was good at doing this. I just work here. Okay, well, I completely read something through, but we will restart from the beginning. Anywho, today's stream is going to be, as the title suggests, poetry, folklore, and fairy tales. I will definitely hydrate in a sec. The community voted on folklore and fairy tales, and Thoth was extremely adamant on poetry, so we're going to slip a few poems in between as well. And I figured we can start the day off by reading about the World Tree, which is found among many different mythologies, not just, like, I will stretch, not just European mythology. And we'll focus, after we talk a little bit about the World Tree, on Yggdrasil, which is Norse mythology. So, let's start this again. The World Tree. For thousands of years, people have conjured images of the outermost reaches of the universe they live within. For many cultures, the cosmos took the shape of a tree, with its branches reaching up to kiss the heavens, and its roots twisting down into the soil of existence. Why am I stuttering so much? Also, I forgot I'm supposed to take a drink. Coffee. Okay. This is what rooted them in their reality and shaped how they saw the world around them. This world tree was at the very core of everything they believed, an indication of how trees have been at the heart of human life since the beginnings of time. We are all creatures of the forest, yet the world trees that span mythologies of Europe, Mesoamerica, and the Near East show how many of us, once, were also people of the trees. The world tree looks different across the globe, but many similarities exist. Usually the tree's branches stretch up, extending into the clouds and beyond, often with a bird at the top. The roots delve deep into the earth, or lie in water. And here, there's usually an underworld beast lurking in the depths, symbolizing chaos and creation. In the middle exists the world of humankind. The number of realms, or planes, the tree encompasses often varies. Yet one thing is constant. The tree is timeless and connects all of us to each other, and the creatures and spirits of the world. It is a thing of gods, spirits, and humankind. It is the place where the spiritual, intangible, and physical meet. The world tree is part of the concept of the axis mundi, the axis or central pivot that the world revolves around. In some mythologies, a mountain or pillar plays a similar role to this tree. In Baltic mythology, the Sol's Koks, tree of the sun, is an apple, linden, or oak that is entirely silver or gold. Many have searched for it in legends, but no one has ever seen it. In the Batak religion, the banyan tree is seen as bringing the layers of the universe together. In Hindu texts, also talk of a cosmic tree, a topsy-turvy growing banyan with the roots in the heavens and the branches reaching down to bless the earth. Yggdrasil. For some, the most famous world tree is Yggdrasil of Norse mythology, said to be an evergreen ash in the poem Voluspa from the Poetic Edda. I am not from that part of Europe, so I'm not going to be able to pronounce some of these things right. Sorry, Swedish. Within it lie the 9 worlds of the Norse cosmos. Some appear vertically along its trunk, while others are arranged horizontally. The realm of the gods lies at the top, the worlds of humankind and giants at the middle, and the underworld at the bottom. The tree is known by the kennings Odin's horse and Odin's gallows, as he sacrificed himself by hanging upon it. Its top is so high that it reaches above the clouds and is snow-capped, while winds tear down its branches. 3 roots delve into the watery places beneath the tree, and different sources say that they are in different locations. One lies over Mimir's well of wisdom, where the god Odin sacrificed his eye for a drink of the waters. It crosses into the land of the Rime giants, which once were where the yawning primordial void of Ginnungagap could be found. Another route is over the spring. Oh my goodness, why did I choose Norse mythology? Hevrelgmir? I'm butchering it, I'm sorry. Meaning the cauldron roaring. This is in Niflheim, a place of mist, cold, and ice. It is here that Njothogar, the monstrous serpent, gnaws at the tree's roots from the dark mountains of the underworld, and sucking the blood of the slain. Hell lives under this root in her underworld realm of the same name, a place of darkness and the dead, some believe to be underground. Hel is sometimes seen as the goddess of death in Norse mythology, a giantess who rules over the portion of the dead who were not taken off to other realms on their passing. It is said half the warriors who fall in battle go to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, ruled over by Odin. The other half go to Volksvagar. I'm so sorry, Swedish. The field of the goddess Freya. Women who have faced noble death can also reside here in the afterlife. The 13th century Icelandic scholar Snorri tells us at one point that those who die of illness or old age are taken by Hel, yet many suggest he often exaggerated original sources of Norse mythology, while others say he invented his own lore. We do know that Hel is the daughter of Loki and Angrboda, the giantess, cast out by the gods with her siblings Fenrir the wolf and the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr. It is said that she is half white and half black, like a decaying corpse. The poem Grimnismal tells that beneath the last root is the land of men, while Gylfaginning tells us one is over the well of Udur in the heavens among the gods, belonging to the three Norns who leave the fate of humanity. Urdir, Verbdandi, and Skuld, representing the past, present, and future. It is here that the Aesir gods come each day over the Rainbow Bridge, Bifrost, to hold court and conduct their business. At the top of the tree is, oh my goodness, Helispikolf, meaning gate shelf. This is Odin's tower where he sits with his ravens, Hugnin, meaning thought, and Munin, memory or mind, and watches over all of the 9 worlds from the heavens. From here, he sees all, from everything humankind does to the acts of the gods. Many animals live among the branches of Yggdrasil. An eagle resides at the top of the tree, and a chattering squirrel, Ratatoskr, runs up and down, passing messages between Nidhogger and the serpent. The stag, Eikpirnir, oh my gosh, feeds from the branches of the tree from the top of the Hall of Valhalla, the afterlife home of warriors who died in battle. The goat, Heidrun, also grazes on its leaves, while both the stag and the goat feed from the tree named Laerdir. Many identify it as Yggdrasil itself. When the tree shivers and groans, it is said that Ragnarok, the end time, is near. So, that was embarrassing, but it's okay. First story down. Alright, let's go to this one. So, delving back into folklore in general, mermaids, selkies, and sirens. The folklore of the sea is filled with tales of half-human hybrids. These creatures, often exceedingly beautiful in either looks or voice, exact a strong allure over those they come in contact with. Whether beguiling with their beauty or with their exquisite nature of their singing, these creatures can be both benign and terrifying, helping humans if it serves their purpose, or luring them to a wet and watery end if the mood takes them. While there are similarities between the mermaids, selkies, and sirens that fill the lore of the sea, there are telling differences, as we will discover below. Seductress or savior, the timeless lure of mermaids. Tales of mermaids have frequented folklore, children's literature, and popular culture in recent times. The origins of these long-haired, fish-tailed, half-human beauties, however, stretch back surprisingly far into history. An Assyrian myth from 1000 BCE tells of Atargatis, a beautiful fertility goddess. One of the many tellings of her story described how she fell in love with a handsome young man, but tragedy was not far behind. Some say he was unable to keep up with her lovemaking, while other versions of the tale say that it was the birth of her human child that caused her great shame. Whatever the cause, the outcome was the same. Atargatis killed her lover and, unable to stand the guilt, threw herself into the sea. Her desire was to become a fish in penance for her terrible actions, but it was not to be. Her beauty meant that the transformation could only be half complete, and the grieving goddess found herself with her old human head and body, but below the waist, with the tail of a fish. From then onwards, mermaids have become a staple of popular culture and belief, spreading throughout the world in numerous forms of incarnations. Some mermaids were said to have shown kindness towards humans. The mermaid encountered by an old man in Curry, Cornwall, rewarded his lack of greed by granting him many mysterious powers and bequeathing a magic comb that was passed down through the generations of his family. More often than not, however, mermaids receive bad press, and their relationship with humans are reported as decidedly negative. For instance, the Brazilian Yara is known for tempting sailors down to her palace under the waves for a watery end. Christopher Columbus famously recorded a sighting during a voyage in 1493, declaring the mermaids he had witnessed as not half as beautiful as they are painted. This scathing assessment might be explained scientifically. It has since been thought that what he actually had seen were manatees, sea cows, or dugongs. Perhaps the best and most well-loved mermaid is Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, a story inspired by earlier mermaid folktales, in which the famous storyteller used fairy tale tropes to conjure a magical narrative beloved by many today. Written in 1836 and published the following year, Andersen's Mermaid has been represented in dozens of incarnations and variations over almost 2 centuries since she first appeared on the printed page. Often reimagined and retold for modern audiences, the tale is one of many now at the center of debates about gender, sexuality, and feminism in folk tales and literary fairy tales. The mermaid is commemorated today by a statue that resides in Langelien, Copenhagen, Denmark, fashioned out of bronze. She is a copy of the original design by Edward Eriksen and erected in 1913. The Little Mermaid, A Tale from Denmark. Once there was a mermaid, the youngest of 6 princesses, who lived in a beautiful kingdom beneath the sea. Her mother was dead, but her father, the Merman King, ruled with the support of their grandmother from a breathtaking palace made of coral and amber and a mussel-shelled roof. Although the youngest of the sisters, the mermaid, the most beautiful of them all, famed for her soft skin and deep blue eyes, she was of contemplative nature and calm content. Each of the princesses had a small garden, and while the others filled theirs with all manner of beautiful things, the youngest mermaid had nothing in hers but flowers that were like the sun and a marble statue of a beautiful boy. For the youngest mermaid was greatly taken with the human world above, begging for tales from anyone who might know anything of what went on there. Such stories only increased her fascination, and the little mermaid longed to see it for herself. This was not a forlorn hope. When each princess reached the age of 15, they were permitted to rise up above the waves and sit on the rocks by night to watch the ships and experience a little of the world of humankind. One by one, her sisters had their turn, and the youngest mermaid watched and waited and listened to their experiences, each passing year only increasing her desire and longing to see for herself. Finally, when she felt she could wait no longer, her turn came. Sunset had just passed when the little mermaid rose up through the ocean for the first time to find a calm sea and golden streaks fading in the sky. Drinking in the fascinating sights, the sound of partying in full swing on a nearby ship caught her attention. Captivated, she swam closer for a better look. But there were many people celebrating, but the one who caught her eye was a young prince. It was his birthday. Hi, Tato. Hi, Zystrom. It was his birthday, and he was the most handsome sight the mermaid had ever seen. She watched and watched, enjoying the brightly colored rockets that were set off in his honor, the lights and the flashes and gaiety, little short of magic in her eyes. I thought that first said Tonto. I may have mispronounced. I'm sorry. The mermaid could not tear herself away even after the last strains of music had long faded, the ship now in darkness as the night went on. So she was there to witness the sudden breaking of the calm, an unexpected storm rolling in, shattering the peace of the night. Waves crashed higher and higher, rolling over the deck and the ship at the mercy of the tempest. As the little mermaid looked on, the main mast was snapped like a piece of kindling, and the helpless vessel tossed onto its side, and those on board flailed desperately in the water. Despite great danger from the floating debris, the little mermaid found the prince, holding his head out of the water and keeping him safe as the storm finally died down. As dawn broke, she took her precious prize to the nearest land, setting him on the beach carefully before retreating to watch. Before long, the prince was discovered by a young woman who ran for help, and the mermaid watched sadly from behind a rock as he was carried off to warmth and safety. The mermaid returned to her home, but could not forget the prince. Growing increasingly quiet and withdrawn, she pined for the young man and the world she had left him to. When she admitted the cause of her sadness to a sister, word soon spread, and it was revealed that the location of the prince's kingdom was known to another mermaid. The princess took her sister there, and the little mermaid now spent her evenings near the palace, watching what went on there and waiting for a glimpse of her prince. Instead of soothing her troubled heart, more and more she wished for an immortal soul like the humans possessed. Alas, being a mermaid mermaid, this was not to be. Instead, like any mermaid, she was destined to spend 300 years beneath the waves before her form would dissolve into foam. Was there nothing she could do to gain a soul? She asked her grandmother one day in despair. There was only one thing. Mew maid. I know! I've been stuttering a little bit, I'm sorry. There was only one thing, the old woman told her in return. If a mortal man loved her more than anything in the world and married her, her body would then become infused with his soul and she would achieve her wish. It could not be, however, for she had only a tail, and how could a mortal man love someone who is half fish? Far from being dissuaded, with her grandmother's words fresh in her mind, that night the mermaid decided to seek help elsewhere. There was a terrible sea witch known for her great powers, and the mermaid set off to ask for her advice. The journey was terrifying and hard. Though bare gray sands and bubbling mud gray sands and bubbling mud, with trees and bushes that were alive, grabbing and pulling at those unwary enough to get too close. Ursula? I don't know if she actually has that name in this, but we'll see. Horrified, the mermaid saw in the mud the bones of animals and humans who had drowned. It was so tempting to turn back and return to her lovely home, but the determined little mermaid continued on her way. Finally, she reached the house of the sea witch, who already knew the reason for her visit. It was foolishness, declared the witch, but if she was determined to go through with it, there was a way it could be done. To swap her tail for human legs and to have a chance to gain an immortal soul and be with her prince, the witch would make her a potion. Before sunrise came, she must swim ashore, sit on the beach and drink it. Her tail would then divide and shrivel, becoming instead the 2 legs she so coveted. It would come at a price, however, the witch warned. The process would be painful and feel like she's being run through with a sword. Not only that, every step the mermaid took on her new feet would feel like treading upon knives as she went. She would, however, without doubt, be the most beautiful girl in the kingdom. A more faint-hearted girl might have balked at this, but the mermaid stood firm and agreed, for her love for the prince was so great. She was willing to suffer anything to have a chance to win his heart. She would not be able to reverse the process, the witch warned. She would never be a mermaid again, and would therefore never see her family under the waves. Although if she didn't manage to convince the prince to love her, she would not gain a soul, and on the first morning after his marriage to someone else, her heart would break before she instantly turned into foam in the sea. Even on these terrible conditions, the mermaid agreed. But there was yet more. As payment, the sea witch demanded the girl's beautiful voice in the form of her tongue. Again, the mermaid did not hesitate, and her tongue was duly cut out, the witch making the promised potion for her. Grief-stricken at the thought of not seeing her family again, but hopeful for what was to come, the mermaid made her way to the beach. Drinking the potion down, she felt the first stab of agony course through her as the witch had promised. It did not matter, however, as the prince himself appeared at that moment, and, as she looked at herself, the mermaid gleefully saw that her tail was gone, human legs now in their place. Intrigued, the prince asked her name, but of course she could not tell him that or anything else about herself. Instead, she was taken to the palace, where she was given clothes and looked after as a valued guest. The prince became very fond of the little mermaid, and the pair were inseparable. She slept on a velvet cushion outside his room, and he took her riding with him, climbed mountains as they explored the kingdom, and she smiled and looked on him with love even as her feet bled. The prince did love her in return, but, alas, as a child, not as a future wife, and the proposal of marriage she so longed for and needed never came. For the prince confided in his silent confidant that he was in love with a girl who had discovered him on a beach after the fateful storm, and he could now love no other. This news nearly broke the mermaid's heart, especially as without her tongue she could not tell him that she It was she who had saved his life that night and was powerless to reveal her identity. As time went on, rumors started to circulate that the bride had been chosen for the prince. Yet the mermaid did not worry. Pages are stuck together. Yet the mermaid did not worry, as he had told her that because there was only one girl for him in the world, for he would never marry, had told her that because there was only one girl for him, he would never wed. To keep up the pretense, however, he made the voyage to where his prospective wife lived, in a neighboring kingdom. The mermaid, his constant attendant, accompanied him on the journey. In a terrible stroke of fate for the mermaid, it turned out that the princess was the very same girl who had helped save the prince. Overjoyed, the prince at once consented to marry her, and preparations for a grand wedding were soon underway. The mermaid played her part with smiles and signs of happiness, even as her feet bled and the pain in her heart grew ever greater as she knew that this marriage would bring with it her death. One night, the mermaid received a visit from her sisters. They were barely recognizable as their hair was shorn off. Out of love for the little mermaid, they made a bargain with the sea witch, swapping their hair for a knife that would save their sister's life. She had only to stab the prince with it when he slept, and the spell would be reversed. The little mermaid could then return to her 300 years as a mermaid and then dissolve in foam. The mermaid took the knife and crept into the room where the prince slept, a smile on his lips as he dreamed of his new bride. Gazing down at him, she felt her heart almost burst with love, and in that moment she knew she could not carry out her task. With a final look at him, she turned and left, throwing the knife far out into the sea. A moment later, the mermaid followed, throwing herself into the deep water, where she dissolved into foam. Despite the witch's dire prediction, however, all was not over for the little mermaid. She was greeted by the daughters of air, spirits who had been offered a chance to strive for 300 years, doing good deeds in order to earn an immortal soul. If they were successful, they would reach heaven, and the little mermaid thought her suffering and selflessness and the little mermaid, through her suffering and selflessness, would now have a chance to do the same. Gladly, she accepted the offer, bidding farewell to the earth and sea below as she rose up into the clouds above. Not the tale that we're all used to, the Disney's variant. I figured we'd go through sirens and selkies as well, because I don't know, it's all of the same genre, essentially. So, the Call of the Siren. Perhaps most famous for their failure to claim Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey, the sirens have long held place in the folklore of the sea. These aptly named entanglers were thought to be of great peril to seamen. Their aim was to lure the unwary onto the rocks, using only their irresistible beauty of their singing, where their victims were dashed to pieces. Others who encountered the sirens simply forgot everything save for the attraction of their voices, eschewing food and drink until they likewise perished. Although often linked with mermaids, the appearance of the sirens differ in one crucial way. While a mermaid is a woman-fish hybrid, the siren was described as half-woman, half-bird. They were also not originally portrayed as creatures of great beauty. It was their voices that stood out rather than their physical appearance, the sweet notes knowing no rival and proving so deadly irresistible. Over time, however, this focus has subtly shifted, and in later depictions, such as John William Waterhouse's painting The Siren from 1900, their physical charms have increased to match those of their voices. In the classical sources, the number of sirens vary. Homer mentions 2, whereas as many as 5 have been reported within varying names and locations. The origins of these golden-voiced temptresses is also hazy, and the sirens are named as daughters of varying deities, including the Greek god of the sea, Phorcys, or the river god, Achelous. Where most sources agree, however, is that the sirens were cold and calculating, almost universally considered to be negative beings. Biblically, in the Apocrypha, women and angels who go astray are condemned to become sirens on the Day of Judgment. In the Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, Nama is equated with sirens, and the term is mentioned in several places throughout. Unsurprisingly, given their favorite pastime, the sirens and the folklore surrounding them have an enduring link with death. Ovid names them as companions to Persephone in her time in the underworld, and the siren of Canossa, of which a terracotta figure showing a woman with the feet and tail and wings of a bird can be seen in the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid, is believed to have been sent with the dead among their grave goods to the afterlife. The Selkie folk, the shape-shifting seals of the northern seas. For those that have lived on shores of the icy waters of the Orkney and Shetland, the raging waves and skerries provide an atmospheric backdrop to tales of Selkie folk. While originally dark, malevolent creatures, Selkies later became renowned as beautiful and gentle, often found dancing on the sand under moonlit skies. Selkies emerge from the waves as seals, only shedding their magical skin when they reach the shore, transforming into human form as they cast it away. Many tales tell that if the skin is taken and hidden, a Selkie cannot return to the sea to live with their Selkie kin, and must stay in human form until it is returned. One such folktale is remembered in a famous Orcadian ballad, The Great Silkie of the Sool Skerry. In this tragic tale, an Orkney maiden falls in love with a Selkie man, who abandons her shortly after she gives birth to their children. 7 years later, a seal appears to her and tells her that he is her lover, only to dive once more into the sea. Another 7 years pass, and the seal reappears once more. This time, he gives the gift of golden chain to their son, who goes with him into the sea. The woman remarries, and many years later, her husband is out hunting one day and shoots 2 seals. Hi, Keo. On returning to the house, he gives his wife the golden chain that he found around the neck of the younger seal. She realizes that her husband has tragically killed both her son and her Selkie lover. Male Selkies were often blamed for the disappearance of young women who wandered too closely to the seashore alone at night. Many disappearances were put down to the girls being whisked away and taken as lovers by Selkie men, who easily conquered the mortal women with their seductive powers. Indeed, women used to paint crosses on their daughters' breasts to ward off the Selkie folk when they set out on a journey across the sea, yet a Selkie lover was often coveted. Selkie nymphs were said to have snow-white skin and large dark eyes, and be just as irresistible as the males. Old stories say that they often sat on rocks in groups, basking in the sun, and if disturbed, they would hurriedly slip back into their skins and swim away. The good man of Lastness tells of a man who refused to marry a woman of his own kind, but set about stealing the skin of an unfortunate sea maiden after stumbling upon a group of them one day. The Selkies leapt into the sea and swam away. Yet all but one had donned their skins and returned to their seal forms. As he bundled her skin away and turned to leave, he heard the maiden weeping, begging him to give back what he had stolen. At her pleading, he instantly fell in love with her and implored her to stay with him as his wife. She agreed, but only because she couldn't return to the sea without her skin, which he refused to return. As the years passed, the couple had 7 children and were content. Yet each time the man left the house, the wife would search high and low for the skin that was stolen from her on that fateful day long ago. One day, when she was searching, as usual, her daughter asked her what she was looking for, to which she replied, "A skin, to make shoes from, to help her daughter's injured foot." The daughter said she had seen father take out a skin a time ago, when he thought her to be asleep. The Selkie wife rushed to the place, pulled out the skin, and ran to the beach, and, slipping it on, she leapt into the sea to return to her Selkie husband. Many children on the Orkney Isles have been said to have Selkie paws, webbing between their fingers and toes. For instance, there are accounts of the 19th century midwife who attributed this to Selkie parentage, and repeatedly cut it away to prevent fins forming from their tiny hands. To summon a Selkie lover. Many folk have yearned to meet a Selkie lover over the years, and when the secret method of calling one to you was uncovered, it was passed down from generation to generation as prized knowledge, as it is now passed down onto you here. First, you should wait until the perfect time to meet your lover, this, of course, being high tide. Then, when this time has come, you must quickly go to the ocean waves. Once you have reached the shore, you should shed 7 tears into the sea, no more and no fewer. At this, a potential Selkie lover will appear in front of you in the waves. But be warned, sadness follows many who take a Selkie as their life partner, as most will always yearn for the waves until their days are done. Honestly, I have always favored Selkies, and the folklore revolving around them has always made me sad, because It's stealing away an identity and keeping someone against their will. So it's not actually love, no matter how content you are. But that was a little bit of folklore from seas and rivers. Mainly the sea, because, I don't know, I have a love for the ocean, I guess. Okay. So should we do fairy tales? Because I have a few of those picked out. Or should we read some more folklore from my horror anthology, which is also mainly stories, but stories from folklore. I'm not even an hour in. Oh no, I'm gonna have to find more stories. I did not pick enough. Horror? Okay. All the horror. I haven't broken the spine to this book yet because I didn't want to, because it's so pretty. So for the first horror, I cannot say that word, story, I chose Fiona McLeod's The Sin Eater, which was initially published in 1895. Does anyone know what a sin eater is? Because it's an actual thing. Well, something from FF. I mean, was it? Was it? I guess you're right. It has a similar ring to it. I guess you're right. It used to be a profession, a long time ago, where a person would consume a ritual meal in order to spiritually take on the sins of a deceased person, but they had to be completely estranged from one another. They couldn't have any prior relationship between the two of them, or else it didn't work, and the deceased would, instead of going to heaven, would fall to hell. So obviously religious in its entirety, but sin. Taste this bread, this substance. Tell me, is it bread or flesh? The smell. It smells. It smells. Its smell is the smell of bread. Sin. Touch. Come, why tremble? Say what this thou touchest. The touch, bread. Sin. Sight declare what thou discernest in this object. The sight, bread alone. Calderon, los encantos de la culpa. A wet wind out of the south maze, and mooned through the sea mist that hung over the Ross. In all the bays and creeks was a continuous weary lapping of water. There was no other sound anywhere. Thus was it at daybreak. It was thus at noon. And thus it was now in the darkening of the day. A confused thrusting and falling of sounds through the silence betokened the hour of the settling. Curlews wailed in the mist, and on the seething limbo-covered rocks, the skuas and terns screamed, or uttered hoarse, rasping cries. Klatu bara nikto? What does that mean? As I hold my place so I don't lose it. This one should only be like 20 pages long, right? We might have enough. Oh, this one's more than 20 pages long. That's okay. Let's see. Ever and again the prolonged note of the oyster catcher shrilled against the air, as an echo flying blindly along the bank of a wall cliff. Out of weedy places, wherein the tide sobbed with long gurgling moans, came at intervals the barking of a seal. Inland, by the hamlet of Contulich, there was a reedy tarn called the Loch Carorin? Let's see. Which means the Loch of the Rowan trees. I had to look for the footnote. By the shores of this mournful water was a man moved. It was a slow, weary walk, that of the man, Neil Ross. He had come from Dunwich, 30 miles to the east, and had not rested foot, nor eaten, nor had word of a man or woman since his going west an hour after dawn. At the bend of the loch nearest the clachan, he came upon an old woman carrying peat. To his reiterated question as to where he was, and if the tarn were Fur Lochen above Fionenfort, that is, on the Strait of Iona, on the west side of the Ross of Mole, she did not at first make any answer. The rain trickled down her withered brown face, over which the thin gray locks hung limply. It was only in the deep-set eyes that the flame of life still glimmered, though dimly at that. Go west, young Fievel. The man had used English whereas he spoke. The man had used English when he first spoke, but as though mechanically. Supposing that he had not been understood, he repeated his questions in Gaelic. After a minute's silence, the old woman answered him in the native tongue, but only to put the question in return. I am thinking it is a long time since you have been in Iona? The man stirred uneasily. And why is that, mother? He asked in a weak voice, hoarse with damp and fatigue. How is it you will be knowing that I have been in Iona at all? Because I knew your kith and kin there, Neil Ross. I have not been hearing that name, mother, for many a long year. And as for the old face of you, it is unbeknownst to me. I was at the naming of you, for all that. Well, I do remember the day that Silas MacCallum gave you birth, and I was at the house on the croft of Ballerona where the Murtagh Ross, that was your father, laughed. It was an ill laughing that. I am knowing it, the curse of God on him. 'Tis not the first, nor the last, though the grass on his head 3 years agone now. Oops. You that know who I am will be knowing that I have no kith or kin now in Iona. Aye, they are all under grey stone or running wave. Donald, your brother, and Murda, your next brother, and little Silas, and your mother, Silas herself, and your 2 brothers of your father, Angus and Ian MacCallum, and your father, Murda Ross, and his lawful childless wife, Dionade, and his sister, Anna. One and all, they lie beneath the green wave, or in the brown mould. It is said, there is a curse upon all who live at Ballerona, and the owl builds now in the rafters, and it is the big sea rat that runs across the fireless hearth. It is where I'm going. The foolishness is on you, Neil Ross. Now it is that I am knowing who you are. Is it old Sheehan MacArthur I am speaking to? The Mise, it is I. And you will be alone now, too, I am thinking, Sheen. I am alone. God took my 3 boys out one fishing 10 years ago, and before there was a moonrise, in the blackness of my heart my man went. It was after the drowning of Andra that my croft was taken from me. Then I crossed the Sound, and shared with my widowed sister, Elise McVury, till she went, and then the 2 cows had to go, and I had no rent, and was old. In the silence that followed, the rain dribbled from the sodden bracket and dripping Loneroyd. Big tears rolled slowly down the deep lines of the face of Sheen. Once there was a sob in her throat, but she put her shaking hand to it, and it was still. Neil Ross shifted from foot to foot. The oozing in that marshy place squelched with ease with each restless movement he made. Beyond them a plover wheeled and blurred splatch in the mist, crying its mournful cry over and over and over. It was a pitiful thing to hear. Ah, bitter loneliness, bitter patience of an old woman. That he knew well, but he was too weary, and his heart was nigh full of its own burdens. The words could not come to his lips, but at last he spoke. So this is in Gaelic. I cannot pronounce Gaelic, so I'm just going to skip it. He said, with tears in his voice as he put his hand on her bent shoulder, "My heart is sore." She put up her old face against his. She whispers, "It is touching my heart. You are." After that they walked on slowly through the dripping mist, each dumb and brooding deep. "Where will you be staying this night?" asked Sheen suddenly, when they had traversed a wide boggy stretch of land, adding, as by an afterthought, it is asking you where if the tarn there... it is asking you where if the tarn there were for Lochen. No, it is Loch Caorian, and the Clachan That is near. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Why do I choose these stories? Anyway, which way? Yonder to the right. And you're not going there? No, I'm going to the steading of Andrew Blair. Maybe you were knowing it? It is called a Bel na Chalis Nambilke? I don't know how to say that. It means the farm in the hollow of the yellow flowers. Okay, if I see an asterisk, I'm going to skip the Gaelic and I'm just going to read what the asterisk says. I do not remember, but it is remembering a Blair I am. He was Adam, the son of Robert. He and my father did many an ill deed together. Aye, to the stones be it said. Sure, now, there was, even till this weary day, no man or woman who had a good word for Adam Blair. And why is that? Why till this day? It is not yet the 3rd hour since he went into the silence. Neil Ross uttered a sound like a stifled curse. For a time he trudged wearily on. Then I am too late, he said at last, but as though speaking to himself. I had hoped to see him face to face again and curse him between the eyes. It was he who made Murdoch Ross break his troth to my mother and marry that other woman, baronet that, God be praised. And they say ill of him, do they? Aye, it is evil that is upon him. This crime and that, God knows, and the shadow of murder on his brow and in his eyes. Well, 'tis ill to be speaking of a man in corpse, and that nearby. 'Tis himself only that knows, Neil Ross. Maybe aye, maybe no. But where is it that I can be sleeping this night, Sheen MacArthur? They will not be taking stranger at the farm this night of the nights, I am thinking. There is no place else for 7 miles yet. When there is the Clachan, before you will be coming to Fiona Fort, there is the warm briar, Neil, my man, or if you can bide by my peats, you may rest and be welcome, though there is no bed for you, and no food either, save some porridge that is over. And that will do well enough for me, Sheen, and himself bless you for it. And so it was. I see more Gaelic. After old Sheen MacArthur had given the wayfarer food, poor food at that, but welcome to one nigh starved, and for the heart some way it was given, and because of the thanks to God that was upon it before even spoon was lifted, she told him a lie. It was a good lie, of tender love. Sure now, after all, Neil, my man, she said, it is sleeping at the farm I ought to be, for Maisie MacDonald and the wise woman will be sitting by the corpse, and there will be none to keep her company. It is there I must be going, and if I am weary, there is a good bed for me just beyond the dead-board, which I am not minding at all. So, if it is tired you are, sitting by the peats, lie down on my bed there, and have the sleep, and God be with you. With that she went in soundlessly, for Neil Ross was already asleep, where he had sat on an upturned clar, with his elbows on his knees and his flame-lit face in his hands. The rain ceased, but the mist still hung over the land, though in thin veils now, and these slowly drifted seaward. Sheen stepped wearily along the stony path that led to her bothy to the farmhouse, from her bothy to the farmhouse. She stood still once, the fear upon her, for she saw 3 or 4 blurred yellow gleams moving beyond her, eastward along the dike. She knew what they were, the corpse lights that on the night of death go between the bier and the place of burial. More than once she had seen them before the last hour, and by that token had known the end to be near. Good Catholic that she was, she crossed herself and took heart, then muttering, "The cross of the 9 angels be about me, from the top of my head to the soles of my feet." She went on her way fearlessly. When she came to the White House, she entered by the milk shed that was between the byre and the kitchen. At the end of it was a paved place with washing tubs. At one of these stood a girl that served in the house, an ignorant lass called Jessie McFall, out of Oban. She was ignorant indeed, not to know that to wash clothes with a newly dead body nearby was an ill thing to do. It was not a matter for the knowing that the corpse could hear. It might rise up in the night and clothe itself in clean white shroud. She was still speaking to the lassie when Maisie MacDonald, the died watcher, opened the door of the room behind the kitchen to see who it was that has come. The 2 old women nodded silently. It was not till Sheen was in the closed room, midway in which something covered with a sheet lay on the board, that any word was spoken. A deep peace to you, Sheen, and to him that is here. Aye, it is bad. Will you have been hearing or seeing anything? Well, as for that, I am thinking I saw lights moving betwixt here and the green place over there. The corpse lights? Well, it's calling them that they are. I thought they would be out, and I have been hearing the noise of the planks and cracking of the boards, you know, that will be used for the coffin tomorrow. A long silence followed. The old women had seated themselves by the corpse, their cloaks over their heads. The room was fireless and was lit by a tall wax death candle, kept against the hour of the going. At last, Sheen began swaying slowly to and fro, crooning low the while. I would not be for doing that, Sheen MacArthur, said the died watcher in a low voice, but meaningly, adding, after a moment's pause, the mice have all left the house. Sheen sat upright, a look half of terror, half of awe in her eyes. God save the sinful soul that is hiding, she whispered. Well, she knew what Maisie meant. If the soul of the dead be a lost soul, it knows its doom. The house of death is the house of sanctuary, but before the dawn that follows the death night, the soul must go forth, whatsoever, or whosoever, wait for it in the homeless, shelterless plains of air around and beyond. If it be well with the soul, it need have no fear. If it be not ill with the soul, it may fare forth with surety. But if it be ill with the soul, ill will the going be. That's really hard. Thus it is that the spirit of an evil man cannot stay, and yet dare not go. And so it strives to hide itself in secret places anywhere, in dark channels and blind walls. And the wise creatures that live near man smell the terror and flee. Maisie repeated the saying of Sheen, then, after a silence, added, Adam Blair would not lie in his grave for a year and a day because of the sins that are upon him, and it is known that they are here. He will be the watcher of the dead for a year and a day. Aye, sure, there will be dark prints in the dawn dew over yonder. Once more the old woman relapsed into silence. Through the night there was a sighing sound. It was not the sea, which was too far off to be heard save in a day of storm. The wind it was, that was dragging itself across the sodden moors like a wounded thing, moaning and sighing. Out of sheer weariness, Sheen twice rocked forward from her stool, heavy with sleep. At last Maisie led her over to the niche bed opposite and laid her down there, and waited till the sleep furrows in the face relaxed somewhat, and the thin breath labored slow across the fallen jaw. Poor old woman, she muttered, heedless of her own grey hairs and greyer years. A bitter bad thing it is to be old and weary. 'Tis the sorrow that, God keep the pain of it. And for herself she did not sleep at all that night, but sat between living and dead, with her plaid shrouding her. Once, when Sheen gave a low, terrified scream in her sleep, she rose, and in a loud voice cried, Away with you! And with that, she lifted the shroud from the dead man, and took the pennies off of the eyelids, and lifted each lid. Then, staring into these filmed wells, muttered an ancient incantation that would compel the soul of Adam Blair to leave the spirit of Sheen alone, and return to the cold corpse that was in its coffin till the wood was ready. The dawn came at last. Sheen slept, and Adam Blair slept in a deeper sleep, and Maisie stared out of her wan, weary eyes against the red and stormy flares of light that came into the sky. When, an hour after sunrise, Sheen MacArthur reached her bothy, she found Neil Ross, heavy with slumber, upon her bed. The fire was not out, though no flame or spark was visible. But she stooped and blew at the heart of the peats until the redness came, and once more it grew. Having done this, she kneeled and said a rune of the morning, and after that a prayer, and then a prayer for the poor man, Neil. She could pray no more because of the tears. She rose and put the meal and water into the pot for the porridge, to be ready against his waking. One of the hens that was there came and pecked at her ragged skirt. Poor beastie, she said. Sure, that will just be the way I am pulling at the white robe of the Mother of God. 'Tis a bit meal for you, Clucky, and for me a healing hand upon tears. Oh, the tears, the tears. It was not until the third hour after sunrise of that bleak day in the winter of the winters that Neil Ross stirred and arose. He ate in silence. Once he said that he smelled the snow coming out of the north. Sheen said no words at all. After the porridge, he took his pipe, but there was no tobacco. All that Sheen had was the pipeful she had kept against the gloom of the Sabbath. It was her one solace in the long, weary week. She gave him this, and held a burning peat to his mouth, and hungered over the thin, rank smoke that curled upwards. It was within half an hour of noon that, after an absence, she returned. "Not between you and me, Neil Ross," she began abruptly, "but just for the asking, and what is beyond. Is it any money you are having upon you?" "No, nothing. Nothing." "Then how will you be getting across to Iona? It is 7 long miles to Fianfort, and bitter cold at that, and you will be needing food. And then the ferry across the Sound, you know." I know. "What would you do for a silver piece, Neil, my man?" "You have none to give me," Sheen MacArthur. "And if you had, it would not be taking it I would. I would kiss a dead man for a crown piece of 5 good shillings?" Neil Ross stared, and then he sprang to his feet. "It is Adam Blair you are meaning, woman. God curse him in death, and now he is no longer in life." Then, shaking and trembling, he sat down again and brooded against the dull red glow of peats. But when he rose, in the last quarter before noon, his face was white. "The dead are dead, Sheen MacArthur. They can know or do nothing. I will do it. It is willed, yes. I am going to the house there, and now I am going from here. God himself has my thanks to you, and my blessings too. They will come back to you. It is not forgetting you I will be. Goodbye. Goodbye, Neil, son of the woman that was my friend. A south wind to you. Go up by the farm. In the front of the house you will see what you will be seeing. Maisie MacDonald will be there. She will tell you what's for the telling. There is no harm in it. Sure the dead are dead. It is praying for you I will be, Neil Ross. Peace to you. And to you, Sheen." And with that, the man went. When Neil Ross reached the byres of the farm in the wide hollow, he saw 2 figures standing as though awaiting him, but separate and unseen of the other. In front of the house was a man he knew to be Andrew Blair. Beyond the milk shed was a woman he guessed to be Maisie MacDonald. It was the woman he came upon first. "Are you the friend of Sheen MacArthur?" she asked in a whisper, as she beckoned him to the doorway. "I am. I am knowing no names or anything, and no one here will know you, I am thinking. So do the thing and be gone." "There is no harm to it?" "None." "It will be a thing often done, is it not?" "Aye, sure." "And the evil does not abide?" "No, the person takes them away, and—" "Them?" "For sure, men, them, the sins of the corpse. He takes them away, and you are for thinking God would let the innocent suffer for the guilty? No, the person, the sin-eater, you know, takes them away on himself. And one by one, the air of heaven washes them away till he, the sin-eater, is cleaned and whole as before." But if it is a man you hate, if it is a corpse, that is the corpse of the man who has been cursed and a foe, if— St! Be still now with your foolishness. It is only an idle saying I am thinking. Do it, and take the money and go. It will be hell enough for Adam Blair, miser as he was, if he is for knowing that a 5 good shillings of his money are to go to a passing tramp because of an old ancient silly tale. Neil Ross laughed low at that. It was a pleasure for him. "Hush, will you? Andrew Blair is waiting around there. Say that I have sent you round, and as I have neither bite nor bit to give you." Turning on his heel, Neil walked slowly around to the front of the house. A tall man was there, gaunt and brown, with a hairless face and a lank brown hair, but with eyes cold and grey as the sea. "Good day to you, and good faring. Will you be passing this way to anywhere?" "Health to you. I am a stranger here. It is on my way to Iona I am, but I have hunger upon me. There is not a brown bit in my pocket. I asked at the door there, near the byres. The woman told me she could give me nothing, not a penny even, worse luck, nor that a drink of warm milk. 'Tis sore land, it is. You have the Gaelic of the Isles. Is it from Iona you are?" "It is from the Isles of the West I come." "From Tiree? From Cole?" "No. From the Long Island. From Uist. Or maybe from Benbecula?" "No." "Oh, well, sure, it is no matter to me. But may I be asking of your name?" "McCallum." "Do you know there is death here, McCallum?" If I didn't, I would know it now, because of what lies yonder." Mechanically, Andrew Blair looked around. As he knew, a rough byre was there, that was made of dead boar laid upon 3 milking stools. Beside it was a clar, a small tub to hold potatoes. On the bier was a corpse, covered with canvas sheeting that looked like a sail. He was a worthy man, my father, began the son of the dead man slowly. But he had his faults, like all of us. I might even be saying that he had his sins. To the stones be it said. You will be knowing, McCallum, what is thought among the folk, that a stranger, passing by, may take away the sins of the dead, and that, too, without any hurt whatever. Any hurt whatever. Aye, sure. And you'll be knowing what is done? Aye. With the bread? The water? Aye. It is a small thing to do. It is a Christian thing. I would be doing it myself, and that gladly, but the passerby who... It is taking of the sin-eater, are you? Yes, for sure, the sin-eater, as he is called, and a good Christian act it is, for all that the ministers and priests make a frowning at it. The sin-eater must be a stranger. He must be a stranger, and should know nothing of the dead man. Above all, bear him no grudge. At that, Neil Ross's eyes lightened for a moment. And why that? Who knows? I have heard this, and I have heard that. If the sin-eater was hating the dead man, he could take the sins and fling them into the sea, and they would be changed into demons of the air and would harry the flying soul till Judgment Day. And how would that thing be done? The man spoke with flashing eyes and parted lips, the breath coming swift. Andrew Blair looked at him suspiciously and hesitated before, in a cold voice, spoke again. That is the folly I am thinking, McCallum. Maybe it is all folly, the whole of it. But see here, I have no time to be talking with you. If you will take the bread and the water, you shall have a good meal if you want it. And yes. Look you, my man, I will be giving you a shilling too, for luck. I will have no meal in this house, Adam, nor will I do this thing unless you be giving me 2 silver half-crowns. That is the sum I must have, or no other. 2 half-crowns, why, man, for 1 half-crown. Then be eating the sins of your father yourself, Andrew Blair. It is going I am. Stop, man, stop, McCallum. See here. I will be giving you what you ask. So be it. Is it... Are you ready? Aye, come this way. With that, the 2 men turned and moved slowly towards the bier. In the doorway of the house stood a man and 2 women. Farther in, a woman, and at the window to the left, the serving wench, Jessie McFall, and the 2 men of the farm. Of those in the doorway, the man was Peter, the half-witted youngest brother of Andrew Blair. The taller and older woman was Katrine, the widow of Adam, and the second brother, oh my goodness, I missed the widow of Adam, the second brother, and the thin, slight woman with staring eyes and drooping mouth was Muriel, the wife of Andrew. The old woman behind these was Maisie MacDonald. Andrew Blair stood and took a saucer out of the clar. This he put upon the covered breast of the corpse. He stooped again and brought forth a thick square piece of new-made bread. That also he placed upon the breast of the corpse. And then he stooped again, and with that he emptied a spoonful of salt along the bread. I must see the corpse, said Neil Ross simply. It is not needful, McCallum. I must be seeing the corpse, I tell you, and for that, too, the bread and water should be on the naked breast. No, man, but here a voice. That of Maisie, the wise woman, came upon them, saying that the man was right, and that the eating of the sins should be done in that way and no other. With an ill grace, the son of the dead man drew back the sheet. Beneath it, the corpse was in a clean white shirt, a death gown, long ago prepared, that covered him from his neck to his feet, and left only the dusky yellowish face exposed. While Andrew Blair unfastened the shirt and placed the saucer and bread and the salt on the breast, the man beside him stood staring fixedly on the frozen features of the corpse. The new laird had to speak to him twice before he heard. I am ready. And you, now? What is it you are muttering over against the lips of the dead? It is giving him a message, I am. There is no harm in that, sure? Keep to your folk, McCallum. You are from the west, you say, and we here from the north. There could be no messages between you and the Blair of Strathmore, no messages for you to be giving. He that lies here knows well the man to whom I am sending a message. And at this response Andrew Blair scowled darkly. He would fain have sent the man about his business, but feared he might get no other. It is thinking I am that you are not a McCallum at all. I know of all of the name Inmol, Iona, Skye, and the near isles. What will the name of your naming be, and of your father, and of his place? Whether he really wanted wanted an answer, or whether he sought only to divert the man from his procrastination, the question had a satisfactory result. Well, now, it's ready I am, Adam. With that, Andrew Blair stooped once more, and from the car brought a small jug of water. From this he filled the saucer. You know what to say and what to do, McCallum. There was not one there who did not have a shortened breath because of the mystery that was now before them, the fearfulness of it. Neil Ross drew himself up, erect, stiff, with white, drawn face. All who waited, save Andrew Blair, thought that the moving of his lips was because of the prayer that was slipping upon them, like the last lapsing of the ebb tide. But Blair was watching him closely, and knew that it was no prayer which stole out against the blank air that was around the dead. Slowly Neil Ross extended his arm. He took a pinch of the salt and put it in the saucer, and then took another pinch and sprinkled it upon the bread. His hand shook for a moment as he touched the saucer, but there was no shaking as he raised it towards his lips, or when he held it before him when he spoke. With this water that has salt in it, and has lain on thy corpse, O Adam, Adam Moore, I drink away all the evil that is upon thee. There was a throbbing silence while he paused. And may it be upon me, and not upon thee, if with this water it cannot flow away. Thereupon he raised the saucer and passed it thrice around the head of the corpse sunways, and, having done this, lifted it to his lips and drank as much as the mouth would hold. Thereafter he poured the remnant over his hand, and let it trickle to the ground. Then he took the piece of bread. Thrice, too, he passed it around the head of the corpse sunways. He turned and looked at the man by his side, and then at the others who watched him with beating hearts. With a loud, clear voice, he took the sins. Give me thy sins to take away from thee. Lo, now I stand here. I break this bread that has lain on thee in corpse, and I am eating it. And in eating, I take upon me the sins of thee, O man that was alive and is now white with stillness. Thereupon Neil Ross broke the bread and ate of it, and took upon himself the sins of Adam Blair that was dead. It was a bitter swallowing, that. The remainder of the bread had crumbled in his hand, and he threw it to the ground and trod upon it. Andrew Blair gave a sigh of relief. His cold eyes lightened with malice. Be off with you now, McCallum. There are wanting no tramps at the farm here, and perhaps you had better not be trying to get work this side of Iona, for it is known as the sin-eater you will be, and that won't be for the helping, I am thinking. There are the 2 half-crowns for you, and may they bring you no harm, you that scapegoat now. The sin-eater turned at that, and stared like a hill bull. Scapegoat, aye, that's what he was. Sin-eater scapegoat. He was not to another Judas to have sold for silver that which not for the selling. No, for sure Maisie MacDonald could tell him the rune that would serve for the easing of his burden. He would soon be quit of it. Slowly, he took the money, turned it over, and put it in his pocket. I am going, Andrew Blair, he said quietly. I am going now. I will not say to him that is there in the silence. Nor will I say to you, nor will I say this to the dwelling that is the home of thee and thine. Here, there was a pause. All listened. Andrew Blair shifted uneasily, and furtive eyes of him going this way and that, like a ferret in the grass. But, Andrew Blair, I will say this. When you are fair abroad, and when you go upon the water, oh my goodness, there's so much Gaelic. May a fatal accident happen to you. May you drift to your drowning. God against thee and in thy face, and may death of woe be yours, evil and sorrow to thee and thine. The bitterness of these words was like a snow in June upon all there. They stood amazed, none spoke, none moved. Neil Ross turned upon his heel and, with a bright light in his eyes, walked away from the dead and the living. He went by the byres, whence he had come. Andrew Blair remained there as he was, now glooming at the corpse, now biting his nails and staring at the damp sods at his feet. When Neil reached the end of the milk shed, he saw Maisie MacDonald there, waiting. These were ill saying of yours, Neil Ross, she said in a low voice, so that she might not be overheard from the house. So it is knowing me and you are. She and MacArthur told me. I have good cause. That is a true word, I know it. Tell me this thing. What is the rune that is said for the throwing into the sea of the sins of the dead? See here, Maisie MacDonald. There is no money of that man that I would carry a mile with me. Here it is yours, if you tell me that rune. Maisie took the money hesitatingly. Then, stooping, she said slowly the few lines of the old rune. Will you be remembering that? It is not forgetting it I will be, Maisie. Wait a moment. There is some more milk here. With that, she went, and then, from within, beckoned him to enter. There is no one here, Neil Ross. Drink the milk. He drank, and while he did so, she drew a leather pouch from some hidden place in her dress. And now I have to give this to you. And now I have this to give to you. She counted out 10 pennies and 2 farthings. It is all the coppers I have. You are welcome to them. Take them, friend of my friend. They will give you the food you need and the ferry across the Sound. I will do that, Maisie MacDonald, and thanks to you. It is not forgetting it I will be, nor you, good woman. And now, tell me, is it safe that I am? He called me a scapegoat, and he, Adam Blair, can evil touch me between this and the sea? You must go to the place where the evil was done to you and yours. And that, I know, is on the west side of Iona. Go, and God preserve you. But here too is Xian. That will be for your safety. Thereupon, with swift mutterings, she said this charm, an old familiar shun against sudden harm. It's an entire passage in Gaelic. I am going to skip it. Scarcely had she finished before she heard heavy steps approaching. Away with you, she whispered, repeating in a loud, angry tone. Away with you! Sechad, sechad! And with that, Neil Ross slipped from the milk shed and crossed the yard, and was behind the buyers before Andrew Blair, with sudden mien and swift, wild eyes, strode from the house. It was with a grin it was with a grim smile on his face that Neil trampled down the wet heather until he reached the high road, and fared thence through the marsh because of the rains there had been. For the first smell he thought of the angry mind of the dead man, bitter at the paying of the silver. For the second mile he thought of the evil that had been wrought for him and his. For the third mile he pondered over all that he had heard and done and taken upon him that day. Then he sat down upon broken granite heap by the way, and brooded deep till 1 hour went, and then another, and the third was upon him. A man driving 2 cabs came towards him out of the west. He did not hear or see. The man stopped, spoke again. Neil gave no answer. The drover shrugged his shoulders, hesitated, and walked slowly on, often looking back. An hour later, a shepherd came by the way he himself had tramped. He was a tall, gaunt man with a squint, the small, pale blue eyes glittering out of a mass of red hair that almost covered his face. He stood still, opposite Neil, and leaned on his cromach. I wish you a good day, he said at last. Neil glanced at him, but did not speak. What is your name? For I seem to know you. But Neil had already forgotten him. The shepherd took out his snuff mull, helped himself, and handed the mull to the lonely wayfarer. Neil mechanically helped himself. Are you going to Fionfort? He tried the shepherd again. I am on my way to Iona, Neil answered in a low, weary voice, and as a man a dream. I am thinking, I know now who you are. You are the man McCallum. Neil looked, but did not speak. His eyes dreamed against what the other could not see or know. The shepherd called angrily to his dogs to keep the sheep from straying. Then, with a resentful air, turned to his victim. You are a silent man, for sure you are. I am hoping it is not the curse upon you already. What curse? Ah, that has brought the wind against the mist. I was thinking so. What curse? You are the man that was a sin-eater over there. I, the man McCallum. I. Strange is it, but 3 days ago I saw you in Tobermory and heard you give your name as Neil Ross to a Ionan man that was there. Well, oh sure, it is nothing to me. But they say the sin-eater should not be a man with a hidden lump in his pack, i.e., with a criminal secret or an undisclosed crime. Why? For the dead know, and are content. There is no shaking off any sins, then, for that man. It is a lie. Maybe I, maybe no. Well, have you more to be saying to me? I am obliged to you for your company, but it is not needing it. I am, though, no offense. Ugh, man, there's no difference between you and me. Sure, there's Ionan in me, too, for the father of my father married a woman that was the granddaughter of Timaeus MacDonald, who was a fisherman there. No, it is rather warning you I would be. And for what? Well, just because of that laugh I hear about. What laugh? The laugh of Adam Blair that is dead. Neil Ross stared, his eyes large and wild. He leaned a little forward. No word came from him. The look that was on his face was the question. Yes, it is this way. Sure, the telling of it is just as I heard it. After you ate the sins of Adam Blair, the people there brought out the coffin. When they were putting him into it, he was stiff as a sheep dead in the snow. And just like that, too, with his eyes wide open. Well, someone saw you trampling the heather down the slope that is in front of the house and said, "It is a sin-eater." And with that, Adam Blair sneered and said, "Aye, 'tis a scapegoat he is." Then, after a while, he went on, "The sin-eater they call him. Aye, just so. And a bitter good bargain it is, too. If all's true that's thought true." And with that he laughed, and then his wife, for that was behind him, laughed, and then, well, what then? Well, 'tis himself that hears and knows of it, if it is true. But this is the thing I was told. After that laughing there was a stillness and a dread, for all there saw that the corpse had turned its head and was looking after you as you went down the heather. Then Neil Ross, if that be your true name, Adam Blair, was dead put up, his white face against the sky, and laughed. At this, Ross sprang to his feet with a gasping sob. "It is a lie, that thing," he cried, shaking his fist at the shepherd. "It is a lie." "It is no lie." And by the same token, Andrew Blair shrank back white and shaking, and his woman had the swoon upon her, and, who knows, but the corpse might have come to life again had it not been for Maisie MacDonald, the died watcher, who clapped a handful of salt on his eyes and tilted the coffin so that the bottom of it slid forward, and so let the whole fall flat on the ground, with Adam Blair in it sideways, and as likely as not cursing and groaning, as his wont was, for the hurt both to his bones and his old ancient dignity. Okay, I need a water break. Ross glared at the man as though the madness was upon him. Fear and horror and fierce rage swung him now this way and now that. "What will the name of you be, shepherd?" he uttered huskily. "It is Eachin Gillis. Gillis? I'm just going to say Gillis. I can't pronounce the rest of it. I am to ourselves, and the English of that for those who have no Gaelic, is Hector Gillespie. And I am Ian Mac Alistair of Strathsheen. That is where Sutherland lies against Ross. Then take this thing, and that is the curse of the sin-eater. A bitter, bad thing may it be upon you and yours." And with that, Neil, the sin-eater, flung his hands upon the air, and then leaped past the shepherd, and a minute later was running through the frightened sheep, with his head low, and a white foam on his lips, and his eyes red with blood, as a seal's that has the death wound on it. On the 3rd day of the 7th month of that day, Ollie MacNeil, coming from Ballymore of Iona, from the west side of the island, said to old Ronald McCormick that was the father of his wife, that he had seen Neil Ross again, and that he was absent, for though he had spoken to him, Neil would not answer, but only gloom at him from the wet, weedy rock where he sat. The going back of the man had loosened every tongue that was in Iona. Then, too, it was known that he was wrought in some terrible way, if not actually mad, the islanders whispered. That it was because of the sins of Adam Blair. Seldom, or never, now, did they speak of him by his name, but simply as the sin-eater. The thing was not so rare as to cause this strangeness, nor did many, and perhaps none did, think that the sins of the dead ever might or could abide with the living who had merely done a good Christian charitable thing. But there was a reason. Not long after Neil Ross had come again to Iona, and had settled down in the ruined roofless house on the croft of Ballyrona, just like a fox or a wildcat, as the saying was, he was given fishing work to do by Ally MacNeil, who lived at an Ard Antien at the rocky north end of the Machar, or plain that is on the west Atlantic coast of the island. One moonlit night, either the 7th or the 9th, after the earthing of Adam Blair at his own place in the Ross, Ollie MacNeil saw Neil Ross steal out of the shadow of Ballyrona and make for the sea, McNeil was there by the rocks, mending a lobster creel. He had gone there because of the sadness. Well, when he saw the Sin Eater, he watched. Neil crept from rock to rock until he reached the last fang that churns the sea into yeast when the tide sucks the land just opposite. Then he called out something that Ollie McNeil could not catch. With that, he springs up and throws his arms above him. Then, says Ollie McNeil when he tells the tale, it was like a ghost he was. The moonshine was on his face like the curl of a wave. White, there was no whiteness like that of the human face. It was whiter than the foam about the skerry it was, whiter than the moon shining, whiter than, well, as white as the painted letters on the blackboards of the fishing cobbles. There he stood, for all the sea was about him, and slip-slop, waves leaping wild, and the tide making two at that. He was shaking like a sail 2 points off the wind. It was then that, all of a sudden, he called in a womany screaming voice, I am throwing the sins of Adam Blair into the midst of ye, white dogs of the sea. Drown them, tear them, drag them away, out into the black deeps. I, ye dancing wild waves. This is the 3rd time I am doing it, and now there is none left, not a sin, not a sin. I am giving the sins of a dead man to thee, by the stones, by the wind, by the fire, by the tree. From the dead man's sin, set me free, set me free. Adam, Adam, Adam and me, set us free, set us free. Aye, sure, the Sin Eater sang that over and over, and after the 3rd singing he swung his arms and screamed, and listen to me, black waves, or black waters, or runnin' tide. That rune is the good rune told to me by Maisie the Wise, and I am Neil, the son of Silas MacCallum, by the black-hearted evil man Murdo Ross. That was the friend of Adam MacAndra, God against him. And with that, he scrambled and fell into the sea, but as I am Ali MacLias, and no other, he was up in a moment and swimming like a seal, and then over the rocks again, and away back to the lonely roofless place once more, laughing wild at times, and muttering and whispering. It was this tale that Ollie McNeil stood between Neil Ross and the island folk. There was something behind all that. They whispered to one another. So it was always the Sin Eater he called at last. None sought him, and few children who came upon him now and again fled at his approach, or at the very sight of him. Only Ollie McNeil saw him at times, and had word of him. After a month had gone by, all knew that the Sin Eater was wrought to madness because of his awful thing. The burden of Adam Blair's sins would not go from him. Night and day he could be heard laughing low, it was said. But it was the quiet madness. He went to and fro like a shadow in the grass, and almost soundless at that, and as voiceless. More and more the name of him grew as a terror. There were a few folk on the wild west coast of Iona, and these few avoided him when the word ran that he had knowledge of strange things and conversed, too, with the secrets of the sea. One day, Ollie McNeil, in his boat, but dumb with amaze and terror for him, saw him at high tide swimming on a long rolling wave right into the hollow of the spouting cave. In the memory of man, no one had done this and escaped one of 3 things: a snatching away into oblivion, a strangled death, or madness. The islanders know that there swims into the cave at full tide Martarb, a dreadful creature of the sea that some call a kelpie, only it is not a kelpie, which is like a woman, but rather a sea-bull, offspring of the cattle that are never seen. Ill indeed for any sheep or goat, aye, or even dog or child, if any happen to be leaning over the edge of the spouting cave when the Martarb roars, for, of surety, it will fall in and straightway be devoured. But with awe and trembling, Ollie listened for the screaming of the doomed man. It was full tide, and the sea beast would be there. The minutes passed and no sign, only the hollow booming of the sea, as it moved like a baffled blind giant around the cavern bases. Only the rush and spray of the water flung up the narrow shaft high into the windy air above the cliffs that it penetrates. At last, he saw what looked like a mass of seaweed swirled out onto the surge. It was the Sin Eater. With a leap, Ollie was at his oars, and the boat swung through the sea. Just before Neil Ross was about to sink for the 2nd time, he caught him and dragged him onto the boat. But then, as ever after, nothing was to be got out of the Sin Eaters save a single saying: "It was cold, or it has a cold, cold hand." The telling of this and other tales left none free upon the island to look upon the scapegoat save one accursed. It was in the 3rd month that a new phase of his madness came upon Neil Ross. The horror of the sea and the passion for the scene came over him at the same happening. Oftentimes he would race along the shore screaming wild names to it, now hot with hate and loathing, now as pleading of a man with a woman of his love. And strange chants to it, too, were upon his lips. Old lines of forgotten runes were overheard by Ollie McNeil, and not Ollie only, lines wherein the ancient sea names of the isle, Iowa, that was given to it long before it was called Iona, or any other of the 9 names that are said to belong to it, occurred again and again. The flowing tide, it was, wrought him thus. At the ebb, he would wander across the weedy slabs or among rocks, silent and more like a lost Dunishi than a man. Then again, after 3 months, a change in his madness came. None knew what it was, although Ollie said that the man moaned and moaned because of the awful burden he bore. No drowning seas for the sins that could not be washed away. No grave for the live sins that would be quick till the day of judgment. For weeks thereafter he disappeared. As to where he was, it is not for the knowing. Then, at last, came the 3rd day of the 7th month when, as I have said, Ollie McNeil told Ronald McCormick that he had seen the Sin Eater again. It was only a half-truth that he told, though, for after he had seen Ross Neil upon the rock, he had followed him when he rose and wandered back to the roofless place which he haunted now of yore. Less wretched a shelter now it was because of the summer that had come, though a cold, wet summer that. "Is that you, Neil Ross?" he had asked as he peered into the shadow among the ruins of the house. "That's not my name," said the Sin Eater. And he seemed as strange then and there as though he were a castaway from a foreign ship. "And what will it be then, you that are my friend? And sure knowing me as Ollie McNeil, that never grudges you bit or sup? I am Judas." And at that word, says Ollie McNeil, when he tells the tale, at that word, the pulse in my heart was like a bat in a shut room. But after a bit, I took up the talk. "Indeed," I said, and I was not for knowing that. "May I be so bold as to ask whose son, and of what place?" But all he said to me was, "I am Judas." "Well," I said to comfort him, "sure, it's not such a bad name in itself, though I am knowing some which have a more home-like sound. But no, it was no good. I am Judas, and because I sold the Son of God for 5 pieces of silver." But here I interrupted him with, "Sure now, Judas, it was 8 times 5. Yet the simpleness of his sorrow prevailed, and I listened with the wet in my eyes. "I am Judas, and because I sold the Son of God for 5 silver shillings, he laid upon me all the nameless black sins of the world, and that is why I am bearing them till the day of days." And this was the end of the Sin Eater, for I will not tell the long story of Ollie McNeil. That gets longer and longer every winter, but only the unchanging close of it. I will tell it in the words of Ollie McNeil. "A bitter wild day it was. That day I saw him, to see him no more. It was late. The sea was red with the flaming light that burnt up the air betwixt Iona and all that is west of the west. I was on the shore, looking at the sea. The big green waves came in like chariots in the Holy Book. Well, it was on the black shoulder of one of them, just short of the ton of foam that swept above it, that I saw a spar surging by. What is that? I said to myself, and the reason of my wondering was this. I saw that a smaller spar was swung across it, and while I was watching that thing, another great billow came in with a roar and hurled the double spar back, and not so far from me, but I might have gripped it. But who would have gripped that thing if he were foreseeing what I saw? It is himself knows that what I say is a true thing. On that spar was Neil Ross, the Sin Eater. Naked he was as the day he was born, and he was lashed too. Sure, he was lashed to it by ropes around and around his legs and his waist and his left arm. It was the cross he was on. I saw that thing with fear upon me. Ah, poor drifting wreck that he was. Judas on the cross, and it was his Eric. But even as I watched, shaking my limbs, I saw there was life in him still. The lips were moving, and his right arm was ever for swinging this way and that. 'Twas like an oar, working him awfully sure. Aye, that was what I thought. Then, all at once, he caught sight of me. Well, he knew me, poor man, and that has his share of heaven now, I am thinking. He waved and called, but the hearing could not be, because of the big surge of water that came tumbling down on him. In the stroke of an oar, he was swept close to the rocks where I was standing, and in that floundering, seething whirlpool, I saw the white face of him for a moment, and as he went out on the resurge like a hauled net, I heard these words falling against my ears: "In ransom for my soul." And with that, I saw the double spar turn over and slide down the back sweep of a drowning big wave. Aye, sure, it went to the deep sea swift enough then. It was in the big eddy that rushes between Scary Moor and Scary Beag. I did not see it again. No, not for the quarter of an hour, I am thinking. Then I saw just the whirling top of it rising out of the flying yeast of a great black blustering wave that was rushing onwards before the current that is called Black Eddy. With that, you have the end of Neil Ross. Aye, sure, him that was called the Sin Eater. And that is a true thing, and may God save us, sorrow of sorrows. And that is all. And that was the story of the Sin Eater by Fiona MacLeod. We can do another horror tale in this book, which is going to probably also be another like 30 or so pages. Let me see. Yeah, it's about 35 pages long. Or we can do poetry. Or fairy tales, because I haven't really read any fairy tales aside from The Little Mermaid. Well, Hans Christian Andersen's version of The Little Mermaid. As I sit up, because I've kind of slouched in my chair. Oops. I think some of the fairy tales are shorter. Well, let's read one of the fairy tales. It's like about a page long, and it's not one that tends to be told all that often. It's from the Brothers Grimm. It's from my little complete fairy tale book that I have from them, and it's called The Singing Bone. Once upon a time there was a country in great distress because a wild boar was devastating the farmers' fields, killing cattle and ripping people apart with its tusks. The king promised a large reward to anyone who could rid the country of this plague. However, the beast was so big and so strong that no one dare go near the forest in which it dwelled. At last, the king proclaimed that whoever caught or killed the wild boar would receive his only daughter for a wife. Now, there were two brothers, sons of a poor man, who were living in the country, and they declared themselves willing to take on the dangerous challenge. The older brother, a cunning and smart fellow, was doing it out of pride, while the younger, innocent and naive, was doing it out of the goodness of his heart. "You must enter the forest from opposite sides," said the king. "That way you'll be more sure to find the beast." So the older entered from the west, and the younger from the east. After the younger had walked for a while, a little dwarf with a black spear approached him and said, "I'm giving you the spear because you have a good and pure heart. With this you can attack the wild boar, and you won't have to worry about his harming you." He thanked the dwarf and set the spear on his shoulder and continued walking without fear. Shortly after, he caught sight of the beast, and when it charged him, he stuck out the spear, and in its blind fury the boar ran into it with such force that its heart was cut in two. The young man swung the monster over his shoulder and headed home with the intention of bringing the boar to the king. When he came out the other side of the forest, he saw a house where people were dancing, drinking, and having a good time. His older brother had gone there, thinking that the boar was not about to run away, and he had also wanted to pump himself up with courage, first by having a few drinks. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, Lizzie's barking. I don't think she's going to stop anytime soon. Anyway, when he saw his younger brother coming out of the forest carrying his prize, his jealous and wicked heart gave him no peace. "Come inside, dear brother," he called to him. "Take a rest, and refresh yourself with a glass of wine." Since the younger brother did not suspect anything evil, he went inside and told him about the good dwarf who had given him a spear so he could kill the boar. The older brother kept him there till evening, and then they departed together. In the darkness, they came to a bridge that spanned a brook, and the older brother let the younger go ahead of him. And when the younger was halfway across, the brother gave him such a hard blow from behind that he fell down dead. After the older brother buried him under the bridge, he took the boar and brought it to the king, pretending he was the one who had killed it. So the king gave him his daughter for a wife. When the younger brother never returned, the older said the boar probably ripped him apart, and everyone believed him. However, nothing remains hidden from God, and this evil deed was bound to come to light. After many years had passed, a shepherd was driving his flock across the bridge and saw a little bone, as white as snow, lying beneath it. He thought it would make a good mouthpiece for his horn, so he climbed down and picked it up and carved a mouthpiece out of it. When he blew on it for the first time, the shepherd was startled to find that the little bone began to sing its own accord. "Oh, shepherd, shepherd, don't you know? You're blowing on my bone. My brother killed me years ago, buried me by the brook that flows, carried off the dead wild boar, and married the king's fine daughter." "What a remarkable horn," said the shepherd. "It sings by itself. I've got to take it to the king." When he went to the king, the little horn began to sing its song again. The king understood full well, and had the ground under the bridge dug up. After the entire skeleton of the murdered man was revealed, the wicked brother could not deny the deed, and he was sewn up in a sack and drowned. However, the bones of his murdered brother were laid to rest in a beautiful grave in the churchyard. The end of that one. I think all of the fairy tales that I chose are kind of on the short side. Yeah, they're all short, so we'll just go through the fairy tales. Okay. The Raven. Once upon a time there was a queen who had a daughter that was still so little that she had to be carried in her mother's arms. One day, the child was very naughty, and no matter what the mother said, she would not keep quiet. The mother became impatient, and she looked to the ravens flying outside the castle. She opened the window and said, "I wish you were a raven and would fly away, then I'd have my peace." No sooner had she said those words than the child was changed into a raven and flew from her arms and out through the window. She headed for a dark forest, where she stayed for a long time, and her parents heard nothing from her. Some time later, a man was walking his way into the forest and heard the raven call. He went towards the voice, and, as he came closer to the raven, said, "I am a king's daughter by birth, and have been cursed by a spell. However, you can set me free." "What am I to do?" he asked. "Go deeper into the forest," she said, "and you'll see a house. There's an old woman sitting inside. She'll offer you something to eat and drink, but you must not touch a thing. If you eat or drink anything, you'll fall into a sleep and won't be able to release me from the spell. In the garden behind the house, there's a big pile of tan bark. You're to stand on it and wait for me. I shall come 3 days in a row at 2:00 in the afternoon with a carriage. The first time, my carriage will be drawn by 4 white stallions, the second by 4 bay stallions, and the last time by 4 black ones. But if you fail to stay awake, I won't be set free." The man promised to do everything she had demanded, but the raven said, "Oh, I can already tell you won't set me free. You'll take something from the old woman." Again, the man assured her that he would touch neither food nor drink. However, once he was inside the house, the old woman went over to him and said, "Poor man, you're all worn out. Come and refresh yourself. Have something to eat and drink." "No," said the man, "I don't want to eat or drink." But she would not leave him in peace and kept saying, "Well, if you don't want to eat, just take a sip from the glass. 1 little sip won't count." Finally, he let himself be persuaded and drank. Towards 2 in the afternoon, he went outside into the garden and climbed onto the pile of tan bark to wait for the raven. Okay, I am sitting up straight because I changed books, and this one's heavy, so I have to have it on the desk, but I will hydrate. Okay. There are so many books on my desk in front of me. I am messy. As he stood there, he suddenly felt so tired that he could not help himself and had to lie down and rest a little. He did not want to fall asleep, but no sooner had he stretched himself out that his eyes closed by themselves and he fell asleep. He slept so soundly that nothing in the world could have wakened him. Hi, Epi. It's not a problem, but I kind of need the book to be, like, flat so I can keep track of where I am. Oops. At 2 o'clock, the raven came driving up with a carriage with 4 white horses, but she was already in full mourning and said, "I know he's asleep." When she drove into the garden, he was indeed fast asleep. She climbed out of the carriage and went over to him, and shook him and called him, but he did not wake. At noon the next day, the old woman came to him again, and brought him food and drink, but he did not want to take anything. However, she refused to leave him in peace, and kept talking to him until he took another drink from the glass. Towards 2 o'clock, when he went into the garden and climbed onto the pile of tan bark to wait for the raven. Then he suddenly felt so tired that his limbs could no longer support him. Since he could not help himself, he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. When the raven drove up in her carriage, drawn by the 4 bay stallions, she was already in full mourning and said, "I know he's asleep." When she went over to him, but he lay asleep and could not be wakened. The next day the old woman asked him what the matter was and why he was not eating or drinking. Did he want to die? "I don't want to eat or drink," he replied, "nor am I allowed to." In spite of this, she set a bowl of food and a glass of wine in front of him, and as the smell reached his nostrils, he could not resist and took a deep draught. And when the time came, he went outside to the garden and climbed onto the the pile of tan bark, to wait for the princess. Yet he was even more tired than he had been on the previous days, so he lay down and slept like a dog. At 2 o'clock the raven came, and her carriage was drawn by 4 black horses. The carriage and everything else were also black, and she was already in full mourning. "I know that he's asleep," she said, "and he won't be able to set me free." When she went over to him, he was lying there sound asleep. She shook him and called him, but she could not wake him up. So she put a loaf of bread beside him, and then a piece of meat, and lastly a bottle of wine. No matter how much he took from any of them, they would always replenish themselves. After that, she drew a gold ring from her finger and placed it on his finger. Her name was engraved on it. Finally, she left him a letter on the ground, in which she explained the things she had given him would never run out, and she concluded her letter saying, "I clearly see that you can't set me free in a place like this. But if you will want to save me, then come to the golden castle of Mount Stromberg. It's within your power. That I know for sure." And after she had given him all those things, she climbed back into her carriage and drove off to the golden castle of Mount Stromberg. Dwarven warbread, indeed. When the man woke, he saw that he had slept through everything. He was terribly sad and said, "I'm sure she's been here, and I haven't set her free." Then he noticed the things lying beside him, and he read the letter that explained everything that had happened. So he stood up and set out for the golden castle of Mount Stromberg, even though he did not know where it was. After he had wandered about the world for a long time, he finally came to a dark forest and continued wandering for 14 days. When he realized that he could not find his way out, he lay down, exhausted, on the 14th evening and fell asleep under a bush. The next day he moved on, and in the evening, as he was about to lie down under another bush, he heard such a moaning and groaning that he was unable to sleep. When the hour came for people to light their lamps, he saw a light glimmering in the distance, got up and went towards it. Shortly after, he came to a house that appeared to be very small, because a big giant was standing in front of it. If you try to go inside, he thought to himself, the giant catches sight of you, but he'll put an end to your life. Finally, he decided to risk it and stepped forward to the door. When the giant saw him, he said, "It's good that you've come. I haven't had a thing to eat for so long, so I'm going to gobble you up for supper." "You'd better not," said the man. "I don't like to be gobbled up. If you want something to eat, I have enough here to fill your stomach." "If that's true," said the giant, "you can rest easy. I wanted to eat you only because I had nothing else." They went in and sat down at the dinner table, and the man took out the bread, wine, and meat that never ran out. "I like this very much," said the giant, as he ate to his heart's content. After supper, the man asked him, "Can you tell me the location of the golden castle of Mount Stromberg?" The giant said, "I'll look it up on my map. It shows all the cities, villages, and houses." He got out a map and kept in the room and looked for the castle, but it was not on it. "Don't worry," he said. "I've got even larger maps in the closet upstairs. We can look for it on them." Yet it was all in vain. Now the man wanted to move on, but the giant begged him to stay a few more days until his brother returned. He had merely gone out to fetch some provisions. When the brother came back, they asked him about the golden castle of Mount Stromberg. When I'm finished eating, he answered, I'll look it up on the map. A little later, he climbed upstairs with them to his room, and they looked for it on his map, but could not find it. Then he got out other maps, that were even older, and they kept on looking until they finally located the castle. However, it was thousands of miles away. How will I ever get there? Asked the man. I've got 2 hours to spare, said the giant. I'll carry you as far as I can. But then I must return home and nurse our child. He carried the man until he was about 100 hours' walk from the castle and said, You can go the rest of the way by yourself. The giant turned back while the man went on, day and night, until he finally came to the golden castle of Mount Stromberg. But the castle was up on a glass mountain, and he saw the enchanted maiden drive around the castle in her carriage and go inside. He was happy to have caught a glimpse of her and wanted to climb up to her, yet whenever he tried, he slipped down on the glass. Once he realized that he could not reach her, he was very distressed and said to himself, I'll stay down here and wait for her. So he built a little hut for himself and stayed there for 1 year. Every day he watched the princess drive around on top of the mountain, but he could not climb up to her. One day he peered out of his hut and saw 3 robbers fighting. Then he called out to them, God be with you. They stopped fighting, listened to see where the cry came from, and then resumed fighting when they could not see anyone. It was dangerous just to be near them, but again the man called out, God be with you. Again they stopped, looked around, and resumed their fighting when they could not see anyone. Finally he called out for a 3rd time, God be with you, and this time he thought to himself, You'd better go see what these 3 are up to. So he went out to them and asked them why they were fighting. One of them said he had found a stick, and that whenever he struck a door with it, the door would spring open. The second said he had a cloak, and whenever he hung it over his shoulders, he would be invisible. The 3rd said he had caught a horse, and that one could ride it everywhere, even up the glass mountain. However, they did not know whether to share these things or part ways. Then the man said, I'll make an exchange with you. I'll take those 3 things, and to be honest, I don't have any money, but I do have other things that are worth more than money. First, however, I must test your things to see whether you've told me the truth. They let him sit on the horse, but put the cloak over his shoulders and handed him the stick. As soon as he had all 3 objects, they could no longer see him, so he gave them all a good beating and cried out, Now, you lazy scoundrels, you've got what you've deserved. Are you satisfied? The man rode up the glass mountain, and when he got to the top, he found the castle door was closed, so he struck the gate with a stick, and immediately it sprang open. He entered and went up the stairs until he came to the hall. There sat the maiden, and she had a goblet filled with wine in front of her. However, she could not see him because he was wearing the cloak. He went over to her, pulled off the ring that she had given him, and dropped it into the goblet so that it rang out. That's my ring, she exclaimed. Then the man who's going to set me free must be here somewhere. They searched all over the castle but could not find him. Indeed, he had gone outside, mounted the horse, and thrown off the cloak. When they finally saw him out by the gate, they rejoiced. He dismounted, took the princess in his arms. She kissed him and said, Now that you've set me free, we shall celebrate our wedding tomorrow. That was that story. Let's see. This one's not that long either. Yeah, it's like 5 pages. That's okay. The Prince Who Feared Nothing, also by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time there was a prince who was tired of living at home in his father's house, and since he feared nothing, he thought, I'll go out into the wide world, where I won't be bored. There are plenty of marvelous things to see there. So he took leave of his parents and set out on his journey. He was on the move from morning till evening, and he followed the road no matter where it led him. One day he happened to come into a giant's house, and since he was tired, he sat down in front of the door to rest. As he began examining his surroundings, he noticed some playthings lying in the giant's yard, several huge bowling balls, along with 9 pins, as big as a man. After a while, he felt like playing, so he set up the 9 pins and began to bowl. Whenever the pins fell, he yelled and shouted, and was in good spirits. The giant heard the noise and stuck its head out the window and spotted the human who was no bigger than other humans, and yet playing with his 9 pins. Hey, you little worm, said the giant. How can you bowl with my 9 pins? Where do you get the strength to do that? The prince looked up and saw the giant and said, You clumsy oaf. You think you're the only one with strong arms? I can do whatever I feel like doing. The giant came down, watching with great amazement as he bowled and said, Remarkable, if that's the kind of human you are. Go and fetch me an apple from the tree of life. What do you want with it? Asked the prince. I don't want it for myself, replied the giant, but for my bride, who's been wanting it for some time. I traveled all around the world but couldn't find the tree. I'll find it for sure, said the prince. I can't imagine anything would prevent me from picking the apple. Don't think it will be easy, said the giant. The garden where the tree is located is surrounded by an iron fence, and there are wild animals side by side in front of the fence. They keep guard and won't let anyone inside. But they'll let me in, said the prince. Well, if you manage to get into the garden and see the apple hanging on the tree, it won't be yours yet. There's a ring hanging in front of it, and you've got to put your hand through it if you want to get the apple and break it off. No one has ever succeeded in doing that. I'll succeed, said the prince. He took leave of the giant and went over hill and dale, through fields and forests until he finally found the miraculous garden. The animals were lying around it, but they had lowered their heads and were sleeping, nor did they wake when he approached them. So he stepped over them, climbing the fence, and reached the garden safely. Right in the middle stood the tree of life, and the red apples glistened on the branches. He climbed up the trunk, and as he was about to reach for an apple, he saw a ring hanging in front of it. Yet he had no difficulty sticking his hand through the ring and picking the apple. The ring closed tightly around his arm, and suddenly he felt tremendous power surging through his veins. After climbing down the tree with the apple, he did not want to climb back over the fence. Instead, he grabbed hold of the large gates and needed to shake the gate only once before it burst open with a loud noise. Then he went out, and the lion that had been lying in front of the gate woke up and sprang after him. But the lion was neither furious nor ferocious. Rather, he followed the prince meekly, as if the prince were his master. The prince brought the promised apple to the giant and said, You see, I had no difficulty getting it. The giant was happy that his wish had been fulfilled so quickly. He rushed to his bride and gave her the apple that she had desired for such a long time. She was a beautiful and smart maiden. And when she noticed that the giant was not wearing the ring on his arm, she said, I won't believe that you were the one who fetched the apple until I see the ring on your arm. I just need to go home and get it, said the giant, who thought it would be easy to take it from the human by force, if he would not give it up of his own free will. So the giant demanded the ring from the prince, who refused to give it to him. The ring must be wherever the apple is, said the giant. If you won't give it to me of your own free will, you'll have to fight me for it. They wrestled with one another for a long time, but the giant could not get the better of the prince, who had been strengthened by the magic power of the ring. Then the giant thought of a trick and said, All this fighting has made me hot, and you too. Let us go for a swim in the river and cool ourselves off before we begin again. Since the prince did not suspect anything devious, he went with him to the river and took off his clothes and the ring as well, and jumped into the river. The giant immediately grabbed the ring and ran away with it. But the lion, who had seen him steal it, set out after the giant, ripping the ring out of his hand, and brought it back to his master. Then the giant hid behind an oak tree, and when the prince was busy dressing himself again, the giant attacked him and poked out both of his eyes. Now the poor prince stood there blind and helpless. The giant came back again, seized his hand like someone who wanted to guide him, and led him to the edge of a high cliff. Then he left the prince standing there and thought, Just a few more steps and he'll fall to his death. Then I'll be able to take the ring off. But the faithful lion had not abandoned his master. He held on tightly to the prince's clothes and gradually pulled him back. When the giant came to rob the dead man, he saw that the trick had been in vain. There must be a way to get rid of such a weak human like that, he said to himself angrily. Then he took the prince's arm and led him by a different path to the edge of the cliff again. But the lion, who had sensed the giant's evil intention, helped the prince out of danger here too. When they came to the precipice, the giant let go of the blind man's hand and intended to leave him alone, but right then the lion shoved the giant over the cliff, and he was smashed to pieces on the bottom. The faithful animal pulled his master back from the edge of the cliff once again, and led him to a tree beside a clear, flowing brook. There the prince sat down, while the lion crouched over and sprayed water in the prince's face with his paw. No sooner did a few drops wet the sockets of his eyes than he could see something again. He noticed a little bird that flew right past him and bumped into the tree trunk. Immediately the bird fluttered down into the water and bathed itself in the brook. Then it flew away quickly and made its way through the trees without bumping into them, as if it had regained its sight. The prince realized that this was a sign from God, bent over the water, and washed and bathed his face in it. When he straightened up, his eyes were brighter and purer than they had ever been. The prince thanked God for his great mercy and went on into the world with his lion. One day he happened to come upon a castle and was enchanted. A maiden with a beautiful figure and a fine appearance stood at the gate, but she was quite black. She addressed him and said, "Oh, if only you could release me from the evil spell that has been cast over me." "What must I do?" asked the prince. "You must spend 3 nights in the great hall of that enchanted castle," she replied. "But you must not show the least sign of fear in your heart. They will torture you terribly, but if you can bear it without uttering a sound, then I'll be released from the spell, and they won't be allowed to take your life." "I'm not afraid," said the prince. "With God's help, I'll try." So he went tearfully into the castle, and then it became dark. He sat down in the great hall and waited. It was quiet until midnight, but then he heard a loud noise, and little devils began coming out of all corners. They pretended not to see him, sat down in the middle of the hall, started a fire, and began to play a game. When one of them lost, he said, "Something's wrong. There's someone here who doesn't belong to us, and it's his fault that I'm losing." "Hey, you behind the stove," called another. "Just wait, I'm coming to get you." The shrieking became louder and louder. Anyone else who had heard it would have become horrified, but the prince sat there very calmly and was not afraid. Eventually, however, the devils jumped up from the floor and attacked him. There were so many of them that he could not protect himself. They dragged him around the floor, pinched him, stabbed him, beat him, and tormented him, but he did not utter a sound. Towards the morning, they disappeared, and he was so worn out that he could barely move his limbs. At daybreak, the maiden came into the hall carrying a small bottle with the water of life in it. She washed him with the water, and soon he felt all his pain disappear, and new vigor flowed through his veins. "You've made it through one night safely," she said, "but there are 2 more to go." She went away, and as she left, he noticed that her feet had turned white. That night, the devils came again and began their game anew. They attacked the prince and beat him much harder than the night before, so that his body was covered in wounds. Yet he endured it all, and they had to leave him after a while. When the sun began to rise, the maiden appeared and healed him with the water of life. Afterwards, as she was leaving, he saw with joy that she had already become white to the tips of her fingers. Now he had only 1 more night to endure, but it was the worst. The devil's pack came again. "Are you still here?" they exclaimed. "We're going to torture you until you can no longer breathe." They stabbed and beat him, tossed him back and forth, and tugged at his arms and legs as if they wanted to pull him apart. Despite it all, he survived, and did not utter a sound. Finally, the devils disappeared, and he lay there unconscious, and could not move, nor could he raise his eyes when the maiden came in and poured the water of life all over him. Suddenly, all the pain was gone, and he felt reinvigorated, as if he had just woken up from a good night's sleep. When he opened his eyes, he saw the maiden standing beside him. She was white as snow and as beautiful as the day is bright. "Get up," she said, "and swing your sword 3 times over the stairs. Then the spell will be broken." After he had done that, the entire castle was released from the magic spell, and the maiden turned into a rich princess. The servants came and announced that the table was ready. It was already set in the great hall, and dinner was to be served. Then the couple sat down together, ate and drank, and in the evening their wedding was celebrated amidst great rejoicing. The end of that one. Those were all 3 of the fairy tales that I chose for today. We still have 1 more folk horror tale, and then the poems that I chose because Doc was so adamant at voting for poems and poetry. So I guess we can have a poetry break since that's quite a bit easier. I just took a drink, tea. I think I chose 4 poems. Yes, 4 of them are flagged. All of the poetry that we're going to be reading is from Wilder because... I will take another drink. Because I've been in a Wilder binge lately, and I really like their poetry. The first one's a little bit on the long side, but that's okay. I don't have any of mine at the moment, like, readily at hand. I think it's all on top of my bookcase behind me. Because reasons. Okay. With the compass in my hand, I wondered if you were still looking for the same home as me. But as I held you, hoping for an... Oh my goodness. I'm going to restart that because I was unable to actually read in a straight line. With the compass in my hand, I wondered if you were still looking for the same home as me. But as I held you, hoping for an answer, you were waiting for an escape. My heart searched for a light to follow because what we became were two ships passing each other in the night. With a darkness that hurt until numb, I found myself wishing for a crash because at least then I could feel something. This hallway is like walking a tightrope. The bed that was meant for two is on the other side, but the thought of twisting myself into our sheets alone leaves me feeling more empty than the bottom of this bottle. My knees fall with these very whiskey tears, and I am left to crawl myself to sleep while you are chasing another dream. I kept the door open when you left, hoping you would find your way back to the night we met, but as minutes turned to hours and hours turned to days, my heart grew tired of breaking into these hands that deserve so much more of me. Today I held a butterfly. It was beautiful, like the stained glass view you loved from our corner of the world. And as it flew away, before I could kiss it goodbye, I waved, knowing I couldn't hold on to something that wanted me to let it go. That was the first one. And when you feel the rain finding its way against your skin, I hope you'll find me before the dancing ends. Our feet find wet pavement while the sun makes it disappear like a magic trick. I don't mind, because we have always believed in the things we couldn't see. I am a city that never sleeps. Strangers pass by me, but the way they smile when it's dark looks the same at every corner. I am a nocturnal heart that knows nothing but darkness, littered with stars and glimmering of wild in my eyes. It is in this twilight that I adorn lovers with privacy, sinners with anonymity, and broken souls with a place to call home. I gift the moon with the backdrop it desires, to control the tides, to unravel sanity, to destroy purity, and to perpetuate lust. I wait until it's tired of ruling, to cover it with the shade it needs to hide inside of my curiosity. I am forever late, but always on time. I am the night, and your smile is mine. I learned how to wish on stars when I was 5. I read the night, like my favorite bedtime story, waiting to catch the falling light. Even still, I wonder why they never came to me. Palms up, fingers stretched, but perhaps my hands have never been big enough for my own dreams. In the springtime of life, with velvet eyes, I felt the stars stare back at me, like love at first sight. I grew colder and older on gray nights. Nights of moonlight coloring a charcoal sky. The stars still stare, but silken eyes stare back like a broken heart. The night's gown is open and blowing now. I wonder if she ever thought that someone was looking back at her through the lens. If she ever imagined the planets gossiping about the little girl with telescope eyes. A little girl that had conversations with the sky when nobody else would listen. A little girl who wrote letters with no receiver in mind. Just love. A little girl who dreamed of dreams, the way everyone else dreams of riches. If she came looking for us now, I tell her that we were always watching, that the universe always takes care of its children, that if she ever feels lost again, she can dig through the dust-heeled boxes in her attic until she finds a telescope that holds all of her childhood secrets, like they're its own. She can peer through it with all the wonder she did way back when, and I promise, if she ever does, we'll remember exactly what it feels like to be at home. Those were the poems that I chose from the latest book that I got from Wilder. Though there's quite a few others in here that I can always pull out too if we end up needing a little more to read. for the sake of time. Wait, where's the other book? Oh, I just put this one on top of it. I am doing great at organizing today. Thank you, Epi. Alright, on to the last story that I intentionally chose. And if we need something else, I will find something else to read. All Hallows by Walter de la Mare, first published in the collection The Connoisseur and Other Stories, 1926. And because time itself can receive no alteration in hallowing, must consist in the shape or countenance which we put upon the affairs that are incident in these days. Richard Hooker. I love you too. I mean, apparently all of my all of my tarot readings yesterday, according to Tato, was because they just wanted to hear my voice. But we are recording this, and I will do my best to upload it. I have to make a YouTube, but that's okay. I think I already have one, actually. But yeah, on to reading. It was about 3:30 on an August afternoon when I found myself for the first time looking down upon All Hallows. At a glimpse of it, fatigue and vexation passed away. I stood at gaze, as the old phrase goes, like the two children of Israel sent in to spy about the promised land. How often the image transcends the real. Not so All Hallows. Having at last reached the end of my journey, flies, dust, heat, wind, having at last come limping out upon the green sea bluff beneath which lay its walls. I confess the actuality excelled my feeble dreams of it. What most astonished me, perhaps, was the sense, not so much of its age, its austerity, or even its solitude, but its air of abandonment. It lay couched there as if in hiding in its narrow sea bay. Not a sound was in the air, not a jackdaw clapped its wings among its turrets. No other roof, not even a chimney, was in sight. Only the dark blue arch of the sky, narrow snow line of the ebbing tide, and that gaunt coast fading away into a haze of a west over which were already gathering veils of sunset. We had met then at an appropriate hour and season, and yet I wonder, for it was certainly not the beauty of All Hallows, lulled as if into a dream in the serenity of air and heavens, which was to leave the sharpest impression upon me. And what kind of first showing would it have made, I speculated, if an autumnal gale had been shrilling and trumpeting across the narrow bay, clouds of wind-borne spume floating among its dusky pinnacles, and the roar of the sea echoing against its walls. I imagine it frozen stark in winter, icy hoar-frost edging its very boss, molding finial crockett cusp. Indeed, there are not works of man, legacies of half-forgotten past, scattered across the human world of ours from China to Peru, which seem to daunt the imagination with their incomprehensibility. Incomprehensible, I mean, in the sense that the passion that inspired and conceived them is incomprehensible. Viewed in the light of passing day, they might be monuments of the race of demigods, and yet, if we could but free ourselves from our timidities and follies, we might realize that even we ourselves have an obligation to leave behind us similar memorials, testaments to the creative and faithful genius, not so much of the individual as of humanity itself. However, that may be. It is my own personal fortune to see All Hallows for the first time in the heat of the dog days, after a journey which could hardly be justified except by its end. At this moment of the afternoon, the great church almost cheated one into belief that it was possessed of a life of its own. It lay, as I say, couched in its natural hollow, basking under the dark dome of the heavens, like some half-fossilized monster that might at any moment stir and awaken out of the swoon to which the wand of the enchanter had committed it. And with every inch of the sun's descending journey, it changed its appearance. That is the charm of such things. Man himself, says the philosopher, is the sport of change. His life and the life around him are but flotsam of a perpetual flux. Yet, haunted by ideals, Egged on by impossibilities, he builds his visions of the changeless, and time diversifies it with its colors and its effects at leisure. It was drawing near to harvest now. The summer was nearly over. The corn would soon be in stook. The season of silence had come. Not even the robins had yet begun to practice their autumnal lament. I should have come earlier. The distance was of little account. But 90 flint hills and 7 miles is certainly hard commons. To plod, the occupant of a cloud of dust, up one steep incline and to see another, to plod up that and to see a third, to surmount that, and, half-choked, half-roasted, to see, as if in unbelievable mirage, a fourth, and always stone walls, discolored grass, no flower but ragged ragwood, white fleabane, moody nettle, and exquisite stubborn bindweed, with its almond-burdened censers, and always the glittering dazzle of the sun. Well, the experience grows irksome. And then, at endless flint erection, with which some jealous lord of the manor had barricaded his verdurous estate, a fly-infested mile of the company of that wall was tantamount to making one's way into the infernal regions, with Tantalus for fellow pilgrim. And when a solitary and empty dung cart had lumbered by, lifting the dumb dust out of the road in swirling clouds into the heat-quavering air, I had all but wept aloud. No, I shall not easily forget that walk, or the conclusion of it, when, footsore and all but dead, dust all over me, cheeks, lips, eyelids, in my hair, dust in the drifts even between my naked body and my clothes, I stretched my aching limbs on the turf under the straggle of trees which crowned the bluff of that last hill, still blessedly green and verdant, and feasted my eyes on the cathedral beneath me. How odd memory is, in her sorting arrangement, how perverse her pigeonholes. It had reminded me of a drizzling evening many years ago. I had stayed a moment and listened to an old Salvation Army officer preaching at a street corner. The sopped and squalid houses echoed with his harangue. His penitent's drums resembled the block of an executioner. His goatish beard wagged at every word he uttered. My brothers and sisters, he was saying, the very instant of our fleshy bodies are born, they begin to perish. The moment the Lord has put them together, time begins to take them to pieces again. Now, at this very instant, if you listen close, you can hear the nibblings and frettings of the moth and the rust within, the worm that never dies. It's the same with human causes and creeds and institutions, just the same. Oh, then, for that strand of beauty, where all that is mortal shall be shed away, and we shall appear in the likeness and verisimilitude of what in sober and awful truth we are. The light striking out of an oil and colorman's shop at the street corner lay across his cheeks and beard and glassed his eye. The soaped circle of humanity in which he was just gesticulating stood starting and motionless. The lassies, the probationers, the melancholy idlers. I had had enough. I went away. But it is odd that so utterly inappropriate a recollection should have edged back into my mind at this moment. There was, as I have said, not a living soul in sight. Only a few seabirds, oyster-catchers maybe, were jangling on the distant branch. It was now 3:45 by my watch, and the usual pensive Lin Lan Lone from the belfry beneath me would soon, no doubt, be ringing to evensong. But if at that moment a triple bob major had suddenly clanged its alarm over sea and shore, I couldn't have stirred a finger's breath. Scanty though the shade afforded by the wind-shorn tuft of trees under which I lay might be, I was ineffably at peace. No bell, as a matter of fact, loosed its tongue in stagnant half-hour. Unless, then, the walls beneath me already concealed few such chance visitors as myself. All Hallows would be empty. A cathedral not only without a close, but without a congregation, yet another romantic charm. The deanery and the residences of its clergy, my old guidebook had long since informed me, were a full mile or so away. I remember in due time, first to make sure of an entry, and then, having quenched my thirst, to bathe. How inhuman any extremity, hunger, fatigue, pain, desire, makes us poor humans. Thirst and drought so haunted my mind that again and again I glanced toward it as I supped up in one long draught that complete blue sea. But Meanwhile, too, my eyes had been steadily exploring and searching out this monument of the bygone centuries beneath me. The headland faced approximately due west. The windows of the Lady Chapel therefore lay immediately beneath me. There, 14th century glass showed flatly dark amid their traceries. Above it, the shallow V-shaped, leaden-ribbed roof of the chancel converged towards the unfinished tower, then broke away at right angles, for the cathedral was cruciform. Walls so ancient and so sparsely adorned and decorated could not but be inhospitable in effect. Their stone was of bleached bone gray, a gray that none the less seemed to be immaterial as flame, or incandescent lucent shadows of blue, no less vivid but paler than that of the sea, on the shelving sward beneath them. And that shadow was steadily shifting as I watched, but even if the complete edifice had vanished into the void, the scene would still have been of an incredible loveliness. The colors in the air and sky on this dangerous coast seemed to shed a peculiar unreality, even on the rocks of its own outworks. So, from my vantage place on the hill that dominates it, I continued for a while to watch All Hallows, to spy upon it, and no less intently than a sentry who, not quite trusting his own eyes, has seen a dubious shape approaching him in the dusk. It may sound absurd, but I felt that at any moment I, too, might surprise All Hallows in the act of revealing what, in very truth, it looked like, and was, when no human witness was there to share in solitude. Those gigantic statues, for example, which flanked the base of the unfinished tower, an intense bluish white in the sunlight and a bluish purple in shadow, images of angels and of saints, as I have learned of old from my guidebook. Only 6 of them at most could be visible, of course, from where I sat, and yet I found myself counting them again and yet again, as if doubting my arithmetic. For my first impression had been that 7 were in view, though the figure furthest from me, at the western angle, showed a little more than a jutting fragment of stone, which might perhaps be only part and parcel of the fabric itself. But then the lights, even of day, may be deceitful, and fantasy plays strange tricks with one's eyes. With exercise, nonetheless, the mind is enabled to detect minute details which the unaided eye is capable of particularizing. Given the imagination, man himself, indeed, may some day be able to distinguish what shapes are walking during our own terrestrial midnight amid the black shadows of the craters in the noonday of the moon. At any rate, I could trace at last frets of carving, minute weather marks, crookedness, incrustations, repairings that had before passed unnoticed. These walls, indeed, like human faces, were maps and charts of their own long past. In the midst of this prolonged scrutiny, the hypnotic air and the heat. In the midst of this prolonged scrutiny, the hypnotic air, the heat, must suddenly have overcome me. I fell asleep up there in my grove's scantly shade, and remained asleep, too, long enough, as time is measured by the clocks of sleep, to dream an immense panoramic dream. On waking, I could recall only the faintest vestiges of it, and found that the hand of my watch had crept on but a few minutes in the interval. It was 8 minutes past 4. I scrambled up, numbed and inert, with that peculiar sense of panic which sometimes follows an uneasy sleep. What folly to have been frittering time away within sight of my goal at an hour when, no doubt, the cathedral would soon be closed to visitors and abandoned for the night to its own secret ruminations. I hastened down the steep, rounded incline of the hill, and having skirted under the sunlit expanse of the walls, came presently to the south door, only to discover that my forebodings had been justified, and that it was already barred and bolted. The discovery seemed to increase my fatigue fourfold. How foolish it is to obey mere caprices. What a straw is a man. I glanced up into the beautiful shell of masonry above my head. Shapes and figures in stone, it showed in plenty, symbols of an imagination that had flamed and faded, leaving the signature for the sole witness, but not a living bird or butterfly. There was but one faint chance left of making an entry. Hunted now, rather than the hunter, I hastened out again into the full blazing flood of sunshine, and once more came within sight of the sea, a sea so near at last that I could hear its enormous sallies and murmurings. Indeed, I had not realized until that moment how closely the great western doors of the cathedral abutted onto the beach. It was as if its hospitality had been deliberately designed, not for a people for whom the faith of which it was the shrine had become a wariness and commonplace, but for the solace of pilgrims from over the ocean. I can see them tumbling into their cockle boats, out of their great hollow ships, sails idle, anchors down. See them leaping ashore and straggling up across the sands to these all-welcoming portals. Parthians and Medes and Elamanites, dwellers in Mesopotamia and in the parts of Egypt about Crayon, villagers of Rome, Jews and proselytes. We do not hear them speak in our own tongue the wonderful works of God. And so at last I found my way into All Hallows, entering by a rounded dwarfish side door with zigzag moldings. There hung, for corbel, to its dripstone a curious, leering face, with its forked tongue out, to give me welcome, an appropriate one, too, for the figure I made. But once beneath that prodigious roof tree, I forgot myself and everything that was mine. The coolness, the unfathomable twilight drifted in on my small human consciousness. Not even the ocean itself is able to completely receive one into its solacing bosom, except for the windows over my head, filtering with their stained glass the last western radiance of the sun. There was but little visible color in those great spaces, and a severe economy of decoration. The stone piers carried their round arches with an almost intimidating impassivity. By deliberate design, too, or by some illusion of perspective, the whole floor of the building appeared steadily to ascend towards the east, where a dark wooden, multitudinously, figured rude screen shut off the choir and the high altar from the nave. I seemed to have exchanged one universal actuality for another, the burning world of nature for this oasis of quiet. Here, the wings of the imagination need never rest in their flight out of the wilderness into the unknown. Thus resting, I must have again fallen asleep, and so swiftly can even the mere freshet of sleep affect the mind, that when my eyes opened I was completely at a loss. Where was I? What demon of romantic chasm had swept my poor drowsy body into this men's haunt? What din and clamor of a horrific dream, whose fainting rumor was still in my ear, became suddenly stilled? Then, at one and the same moment, a sense of utter dismay at earthly surroundings no longer serene and peaceful, but grim and forbidding, flooded my mind, and I became aware that I was no longer alone. 20 or 30 paces away, and a little this side of the rude screen, an old man was standing. To judge from the black and purple velvet and tasseled tag gown he wore, he was a verger. He had not yet realized, it seemed, that a visitor shared his solitude, and yet he was listening. His head was craned forward and leaned sideways on its rusty shoulders. As steadily as I watched him, he raised his eyes with a peculiar stealthy deliberation, scanned the complete upper regions of the northern transept. Not the faintest rumor of any sound may have attracted his attention reached me where I sat. Perhaps a wild bird had made its entry through the broken pane of glass, and with its cry had at the same moment awakened me and caught its attention. Or maybe the old man was waiting for some fellow occupant to join him from above. I continued to watch him. Even at this distance, the silvery twilight cast by the clerestory windows was sufficient to show me, though vaguely, his face, the high-sloping nose, the lean cheekbones and protruding chin. He continued so long in the same position that I at last determined to break in on his reverie. At sound of my footsteps, his head sunk cautiously back upon his shoulders, and he turned, and then, motionlessly, surveyed me as I drew near. He resembled one of those old men whom Rembrandt delighted in drawing, the knotted hands, the back-drooping eyebrows, the wide, thin-lipped ecclesiastical mouth. The intent, cavernous dark eyes beneath the heavy folds of their lids, white as a miller with dust, hot and draggled. I was hardly to be the kind of visitor that any self-respecting custodian would warmly welcome, but he greeted me nonetheless with every mark of courtesy. I apologized for the lateness of my arrival, and explained it as best I could. Till I caught sight of you, I concluded lamely. I hadn't ventured very far in, otherwise I might have found myself a prisoner for the night. It must be dark in here, when there is no moon. The old man smiled, but wryly. As a matter of fact, sir, he replied, the cathedral is closed to visitors at 4. At such times, that is, when there is no afternoon service. Services are not as frequent as they were, but visitors are rare too. In winter, in particular, you notice the gloom, as you say, sir. Not that I ever spend a night here, though I am usually last to leave. There is the risk of fire to be thought of, and I think I should have detected your presence here, sir. One becomes accustomed after many years. There was the usual trace of official pedantry in his voice, but it was more pleasing than otherwise. Nor did he show any wish to be rid of me. He continued to survey, although his eye was a little absent, and his attention seemed to be divided. I thought perhaps I might be able to find room for the night, and really explore the cathedral tomorrow morning. It has been a tiring journey. I come from B. From B. It is a fatiguing journey, sir, taken on foot. I used to walk in there to see a sick daughter of mine. Carriage parties occasionally made their way here, but not so much as once. We are too far out of the hurly-burly to be much intruded on. Not that them who would come to make worship here are intruders. Far from it, but most that come are mere sightseers. And the fewer of them, I say, in the circumstances, the better. Something in what I had said, or in my appearance, seemed to have reassured him. Well, I cannot claim to be a regular churchgoer, I said. I am myself a mere sightseer, and yet, even to sit here for a few minutes is to be reconciled. Reconciled, sir, the old man repeated, turning away. I can well imagine it after a journey on such a day as this. But to live here is another matter. I was thinking on that, I replied, in a foolish attempt to retrieve the position. I must, as you say, be desolate enough in the winter, for 2/3 of the year indeed. We have our storms, sir, the bad and the good, he agreed, and our position is specifically prolific of what they call sea fog. It comes driving in from the sea for days and nights together, gale and mist, so that you can scarcely see your open hand in front of your eyes, even in broad daylight. And the noise of it, sir, sweeping across overhead in that woolliness of mist, if you take me, is most peculiar. It is shocking to a stranger. No, sir, we are left pretty much to ourselves when the fine weather birds are flown. You'd be astonished at the power of the winds here. There was a mason, a local man too, not above 2 or 3 years ago, was blown clean off the roof from under the tower, tossed up into the air like an empty sack, but the old man, at last, allowed his eyes to stray upwards to the roof again. But there's not much doing now. He seemed to be pondering. Nothing opened. I mustn't detain you, I said, but you were saying that services are infrequent now. Why is that? When one thinks of... But tact restrained me. Pray, don't think of keeping me, sir. It is part of my duties, but from a remark you let fall, I was supposing you may have seen something that had appeared, I understand, not many months ago, in the newspapers. We lost our Dean Pomfrey, last November. To all intents and purposes, I mean, and his office has not yet been filled. Between you and me, sir, there's a hitch, though I should wish it to go no further. They are greedy monsters, those newspapers. No respect, no discretion, no decency in my view. And they copy each other like cats in a chorus. We have never wanted to be a notary here, sir. We have never wanted to be a notoriety here, sir. And not of late, of all times. We must face our own troubles. You'd be astonished how callous the mere sightseer can be. And not only them from over the water from whom our particular troubles cannot concern, but far worse, parties as English as you or me. They ask you questions you wouldn't believe possible in a civilized country. Not that they care what becomes of us. Not one iota, sir. We talk of them, masked up inquisitors in olden times. But there is many a human being in our own would enjoy seeing a fellow creature on the rack if he could get the opportunity. It's a heartless age, sir. This was queerish talk in the circumstances, and after all, I myself was of the glorious company of the sightseers. I held my peace, and the old man, as if to make amends, asked me if I would care to see any particular part of the building. The light is smalling, he explained, but still, if we keep to the ground level, there'll be a few minutes to spare, and we shall not be interrupted if we go quietly on our way. For the moment, the reference eluded me. I could only thank him for the suggestion, and once more beg him not to put himself to any inconvenience. I explained, too, that though I had no personal acquaintance with Dr. Pomfrey, I had read of his illness in the newspapers. Isn't he, I added a little bit dubiously, the author of the Church and the Folk? If so, he must be exceedingly learned, and a delightful man. Aye, sir, the old verger put up his hand towards me. You may well say it. A saint, if there ever was one. But it's worse than illness, sir. It's oblivion, and, thank God, the newspapers didn't get a hold of more than a bare outline. The drop in his voice. This way, if you please. And he led me off gently, down the aisle once more, coming to a standstill beneath the roof and the tower. What I mean, sir, is that there's very few left in this world who have any place in their minds for a sacred confidence. No reverence, sir. They all would be leaf, all hollows, and all it stands for were swept away tomorrow, demolished to the dust. And that gives me the greatest caution with whom I speak. But those Catholics have their wooden boxes all built for the purpose. What else, I ask you, is the meaning of their fasts and penances? You see, sir, I am myself, and have been for upwards of 12 years now, the Dean's verger. In the sight of no respecter of persons, of offices and dignities, that is, I take. I might claim to be even an elder brother, and our Dean, sir, was a man who was all things to all men. No pride of place, no vaudiness, none of your apron and gaiter high and mightiness whatsoever, sir. And then that, and to come on us without warning, or at least without warning as we could be taken as such. I followed his eyes into the dark and stony places above us. A light like tarnished silver lay over the soundless vaultings, but so, of course, dusk either of evening or daybreak would affect the ancient stones. Nothing moved there. You must understand, sir, the old man was continuing. The procession for divine service proceeds from the vestry over yonder out through those wrought iron gates, and so under the rude screen, and in the chancel there. Visitors are admitted on showing a card or a word to the verger in charge, but not otherwise. If you stand a pace or two to the right, you will catch a glimpse of the altar screen, 14th century work, Bishop Robert de Belfont, and a unique example of the age. But what I was saying is that when we proceed for the services out of here into there, it has always been our custom to keep pretty close together, more seemingly indecent, sir, than straggling in like so many sheep. Besides, sir, aren't we at such times in the manner of an array marching as to war, if you take me? It's a lesson in objects. The third verger leading, then the choristers, boys and men, though sadly depleted, then the minor canons, and then any other dignitaries who might happen to be present with the canon in residence, then myself, sir, followed by the dean. There hadn't been much amiss up to then, and on the afternoon I can vouch, and I've repeated it ad nauseam, that there was not a single stranger out in this beyond here, sir, knave or transepts. Not within view, as it, I am starting to get tired. Not within view, that is. One can't expect to see through 4 feet of Norman stone. Well, sir, we had gone on our way, and I had actually turned about as usual to bow Dr. Pomfrey into his stall, when I found to my consternation, I say, he wasn't there. It alarmed me, sir, and as you might believe if you knew full the circumstances. Not that I lost my presence of mind. First, my duty was to see all things to be in order, and nothing unseemly to occur. My feelings were another matter. The old gentleman had left the vestry with us, that I knew. I had myself robed him as usual, and he was in his own manner smiling, with his, "Well, Jones, another day gone, another day gone." Well, he was always an anxious gentleman for time, sir. How we spent it and all. Hydrate. Hold on, I need to put a piece of paper where I am. It looks like I chose enough stuff again this week. We still have a little bit to go. Oh yeah, we still have a little bit to go. Stretch! Thank you for the reminders. As I say, then, he was behind me when we swept out of the gates. I saw him coming on out of the tail of my eye. We grew accustomed to it, to see with the whole of the eyes, I mean. And then, not a vestige, and me, well, sir, nonplussed as you may imagine. I gave a look and sign at Canon Occam, and the service proceeded as usual, while I hurried back to the vestry, thinking the poor gentleman must have been taken suddenly ill. And yet, sir, I was not surprised to find the vestry vacant, and him not there. I had been expecting matters to come to what you might call a head. As best I could, I held my tongue, and a fortunate thing it was that Canon Occam was then in residence and not Canon Lay Shogar, though perhaps I am not one to say it is. No, sir, our beloved Dean, as pious and unworldly a gentleman as ever graced the church, was gone forever. He was not to appear in our midst again. He had been, and the old man, with elevated eyebrows and a long lean mouth, nearly whispered the words in my ear. He had been abducted, sir. Abducted, I murmured. The old man closed his eyes with trembling lids, and added, "He was found, sir, late that night up there in what they call the trophy room, sitting in a corner there, weeping. A child, not a word from what had persuaded him to go or misled him there, not a word of sorrow or sadness, thank God. He didn't know us, sir, didn't know me, just simple, harmless, memory all gone, simple, sir." It was foolish to be whispering together like this beneath these enormous spaces, with not so much a clothes moth for a sign of life within view. But I even lowered my voice still farther. Were there no premonitory symptoms? Had he been failing for long? The spectacle of grief in any human face is afflicting, but in a face as aged and resigned as this old man, I turned away in remorse the moment the question was out of my lips. Emotion is a human solvent, and a sort of friendliness had sprung up between us. "If you will just follow me," he whispered, "there's a little place where I make my ablutions that might be of service, sir. We would converse there in better comfort. I am sometimes reminded of those words in Ecclesiastes, and a bird of the air shall tell of the matter." There is not much in our poor human affairs, sir, that was not known to the writer of that book. He turned and led the way with surprising celerity, gliding along in his thin-soled, square-toed clerical spring-side boots, and came to a pause outside a nail-studded door. He opened it with a huge key and admitted me into the recess under the central tower. We mounted a spiral stone staircase and passed along a corridor hardly more than 2 feet wide, and so dark now and again I thrust out my fingertips in search of the black velvet gown to make sure of my guide. The corridor at length conducted us into a little room whose only illumination, I gathered, was that of an ebbing dusk from within the cathedral. The old man, with trembling, rheumatic fingers, lit a candle, and, thrusting its stick into the middle of an old oak table, pushed open yet another thick oaken door. "You will find a basin and towel in there, sir, if you would be so kind." I entered. A print of the crucifixion was tin-tacked to the paneled wall, and beneath it stood a tin basin and a jug on a stand. Never was water sweeter. I laved my face and hands and drank deep. My throat was like a parched river, coarse after a drought. What appeared to be a tarnished censer lay in one corner of the room. A pair of 7-branched candlesticks shared a recess in the mousetrap, and a book. My eyes passed wearily yet gratefully from one to another of these muted, discarded objects, while I stood drying my hands. When I returned, the old man was standing motionless before the spike-barred grille of the window, peering out and down. "You asked me, sir," he said, turning his lank-waxen face to the feeble rays of the candle. "You asked me, sir, a question which, if I understood you aright, was this. Was there anything that had occurred previous that would have explained what I had been telling you? Well, sir, it's a long story, and one best restricted to them, perhaps, that have the goodwill of things at heart. All Hallows, I might say, sir, is my second home. I have been here boy and man, for close on 55 years, have seen 4 bishops pass away and have served under no less than 5 several deans, Dr. Pomfrey, poor gentleman, being the last of the 5. If such a word could be excused, sir, it is no exaggeration to say that Canon Lay Shogar is a greenhorn by comparison, which may in part be why he has never quite hit it off, as they say, with Canon Occam, or even with Archdeacon Trafford, though he's another kind of gentleman altogether, and he is at present abroad. He had what they call a breakdown in health, sir. Now, in my humble opinion, what was required was not only wisdom and knowledge, but simple common sense. In the circumstances I am about to mention, it serves no purpose for any of us to be talking too much, to be forever sitting at a table with shut doors and finger on lip and discussing what to most intents and purposes would hardly be called evidence at all, sir. What is the use of argufying, splitting hairs, objurgating about trifles, when matters are sweeping rapidly on from bad to worse? I say it with all due respect, and not, I hope, thrusting myself into what doesn't concern me. Dr. Pomfrey might be with us now in his own self and reason, if only common caution had been observed. But now that the poor gentleman has gone beyond all that, there is no hope of action or agreement left, none whatsoever. They meet, and they meet, and they have now one expert, now another, down from London, and even from the continent. And I don't say they are not knowledgeable gentlemen either, nor a pride to their profession. But why not tell all? Why keep back the very secret of what we know? That's what I'm asking. And what's the answer? Why, simply that they don't want to believe what runs counter to their hopes and wishes and credibilities and comfort in this world, that's what they keep out of sight as long as decency permits. Canon Lay Shogar knows, sir, what I know, and how, I ask, is he going to get to grips with it at this late day, if he refuses to acknowledge that such things are what every fragment of evidence goes to prove that they are? It's we, sir, and not the rest of the heedless world outside, who in the long and short of it are responsible, and what I say is, no power or principality here or hereunder can take possession of a place while those inside have faith enough to keep them out. But once let that falter, the seas are in. And when I say no power, sir, I mean, with all deference, even Satan himself. The lean, lank face had set at the world like a wax mask. The black eyes beneath the heavy lids were fixed on mine with an acute intensity, and, though more inscrutable things haunted them, with an unfaltering courage, so dense a hush hung about us, that the very stones of the walls seemed to be of silence solidified. It is curious what refreshment of spirit a mere tin basin full of water may be. I stood leaning against the edge of the table so that the candlelight still rested on my companion. "What is wrong here?" I asked him baldly. He seemed not to have expected so direct an inquiry. "Wrong, sir? Why, if I might make so bold," he replied, with a wan, faraway smile, and gently drawing his hand down one of the velvet lapels of his gown. "If I might make so bold, sir, I take it that you have come as a direct answer to prayer." His voice faltered. "I'm an old man now, and nearly at the end of my tether. You must realize, if you please, that I can't get any help that I can understand. I'm not doubting that the gentlemen I have mentioned have only the salvation of the cathedral at heart. The cause, sir, and a grave responsibility yet. But they refuse to see how close to the edge of things we are, and how we are drifting. Take mere situation. So far as knowledge tells me, there is no sacred edifice in the whole kingdom, of a piece that is, with All Hallows, not only in mere size and age, but in what I might call sanctity and tradition, that is so open, I mean, sir, to attack of this peculiar terrifying nature. Terrifying, sir, though I hold fast unto my wits, my Maker has bestowed on me. Where else, may I ask, would you expect the power of darkness to congregate in open besiegement than in this very narrow valley? First, the sea out there. Are you aware, sir, that ever since living remembrance, flood tide has been gnawing and mumbling its way into this bay to the extent of 3 or 4 feet per annum? 40 inches, and 40 inches, and 40 inches, corroding on and on. Watch it, sir. Man and boy as I have these 60 years past, and then make a century of it. Not to mention positive leaps and bounds. And now think a moment of the floods and gales that fall upon us autumn and winter through and even into spring, when this valley is liker paradise to young eyes than any place on earth. They make the roads from the nearest towns well nigh impassable, which means that for some months of the year we are to all intents and purposes clean cut off from the rest of the world, as the Schnindels out there from the mainland. Are you aware, sir, I continue, that as we now stand, we are above a mile from the traces of the nearest human habitation, and them merely the relics of a burnt-out old farmstead? I warrant that if, and which God forbid, you had been shut up here during the coming night, and it was a near thing, but you weren't, I warrant you might have shouted yourself dumb out of the nearest window, if window you could reach, and not a human soul could heed or help you. I shifted my hands on the table. It was tedious to be asking questions that received only vague and elusive replies. It is always a little disconcerting in the presence of a stranger to be spoken to so close with such positiveness. Well, I smiled, I hope I should not have disgraced my nerves to such an extreme as that. As a small boy, one of my particular fancies was to spend a night in a pulpit. There's a cushion, you know. The old man's solemn glance never swerved from my eyes. But I take it, sir, he said, if you had ventured to give out the text up there in the dark hours, your jocare young mind would not have been prepared for any kind of congregation? You mean, I said a little sharply, that the place is haunted. The absurd notion flitted across my mind of some wandering tribe of gypsies chancing on a refuge so ample and so isolated as this, and taking up its quarters in its secret parts. The old church must be honeycombed with corridors and passages and chambers pretty much like the one in which we were now concealed. And what does Catholic imply but an infinite hospitality within prescribed limits? But the old man had taken me at my word. I mean, sir, he said firmly, shutting his eyes, that there are devilish agencies at work here. He raised his hand. I don't, entreat you, dismiss that I am saying as a wanderings of a foolish old man. He drew a little nearer. I have heard them with these ears. I have seen them with these eyes, though whether they are a positive substance, sir, is beyond my small knowledge to declare. But what indeed might be expected of their substance to be? First, I take it, says the book, to be as such no man can, by learning to find, nor by wisdom search out. Is that so? Then I go by the book. And next, what does the same word, or very near it, if I speak of the Apocrypha, say of their purpose? It says, and correct me if I go astray, devils are creatures made by God, and that of vengeance. So far, so good, sir. We stop when we can go no further. Vengeance, but of their power, of what they can do, I give you definite evidences. It would be by word, if once the rumor was spread abroad. And if that is not so, why, I asked, does every expert that comes here leave us in haste and in dismay? They go off with their tails between their legs. They see, they grope in, but they don't believe. They invest reasons, and they hasten to leave us. His face shook with emphasis as he laid upon the word. Why? Why? Because the experience is beyond their knowledge, sir. He drew back, breathless, and, as I could see, profoundly moved. But surely, I said, very old building is bound, in time, to show symptoms of decay. Half the cathedrals of England, half of its churches, even of age, have been restored, and in many cases with ghastly results. This new grouting, and so on. Why, only the other day, all I mean is, why should you suppose mere wear and tear should be caused by any other agency then? The old man turned away. I must apologize, he interrupted me, with his intimidable admixture of modesty and dignity. I am a poor mouth at explanations, sir. Decay, stress, straining, settling, dissolution. I have heard those words bandied from lip to lip like a game at cup and ball. They fill me with nausea. Why am I speaking of not dissolution, sir, but of repairs, restorations, not decay, strengthening, not corroding loss, and awful progress? I could show you places, and chiefly obscured from direct view, and difficult of close examination, sir, where stones lay as rotted as pumice, and as fretted as a sponge, have been replaced by others, fresh quarried, and nothing of their kind within 20 miles. There are spots. There are spots where massive blocks of yard, more square, have been pushed into place by sheer force. All Hallows is safer at this moment than it has been for 300 years. They meant well, them who came to see, full of talk and fine language, and went dumb away. I grant you they meant well. I allow that. They hummed and they hawed, they smirked this and they shrugged that. But at heart, sir, they were cowed, horrified, all at a loss. Their very faces showed it. But if you ask me for what purpose such doings are afoot, I have no answers. None. But now, supposing you yourself, sir, were one of them, with your repute at stake, and you were called in to look at the house which the owners of it and them who had it in trust were disturbed by its being re-edificated and restored by some agency unknown to them. Supposing that, why, and he rapped his knuckles on the table, being human and not one of us, mightn't you be going away with mouth shut, because you didn't want to get talked about to your disadvantage? And wouldn't you at last dismiss the whole thing as foolish delusion, in belief that living in out-of-the-way parts like these cuts a man off from the world, breeds maggots in the mind? I assure you, sir, they don't. Not even Canon Occam himself, to the full. They don't believe me. And yet, when they have their meeting of the chapter, they talk and wrangle around and about, nothing else. I can bear the other without a murmur. What God sends, I say, we humans deserve. We have laid ourselves open to it. But when you buttress up blindness and wickedness with downright folly, why, then, sir, I sometimes fear for my own reason. He set his shoulders as square as his aged frame would permit, and with fingers clutching the lapels beneath his chin, he stood, gazing out into the darkness through that narrow inward window. Ah, sir, he began again, I have not spent 60 years in the solitary place without paying heed to my own small wandering thoughts and instincts. Look at your newspapers, sir. What they call the Great War is over, and he'd be a brave man who would take an oath before heaven that was the only human design. And yet, what do we see around us? Nothing but strife and juggleries and hatred and contempt and discord wherever you look. I am no scholar, sir, but so far as my knowledge and experience carry me, we human beings are living today merely from hand to mouth. We learn today what ought to have been done yesterday, and yet we are at a loss to know what's to be done tomorrow. And the church, sir, God forbid I should push my way into what does not concern me. And if you had told me half an hour gone by that you were a regular churchman, I shouldn't be pouring out all this to you now. It wouldn't be seemly, but being not so gives out all this to you now. Gives me confidence. I am losing my place. Bunk. By merely listening, you can help me, sir, though you can't help us. Centuries ago, in my humble judgment rightly, we broke away from the parent stem and rooted ourselves in our own soil. But, right or wrong, doesn't that of itself, I ask you, make us all the more open to attack from him who never wearies in going to and fro in the world seeking out whom he may devour? I am not wishing you to take sides, but a gentleman doesn't scoff. You don't find him jeering at what he doesn't rightly understand. He keeps his own counsel, sir, and that's where, as I say, Canon Lee Shogar sees me doubting. He refuses to make allowances, though up there in London things may look different. He gets his company there, and then for him the whole kaleidoscope changes, if you take me. The old man scanned me in an instant as if inquiring within himself whether, after all, I too might not be one of the outcasts. You see, sir, he went on dejectedly, I can bear what may be to come. I can, if need be, live on through what few years may remain to me, and keep going, as they say. But only if I can be assured that my inmost senses are not cheating and misleading me. Tell me the worst, and you will have done an old man a service he can never repay. tell me, on the other hand, that I am merely groping along in a network of devilish delusion, sir, well, in that case, I hope to be with my master, Dr. Pomfrey, as soon as possible. We were children once, and now there's nothing worse in the world for him to come into, in a manner of speaking. Oh, sir, sometimes I wonder if what we call childhood and growing up isn't a copy of fate of our ancient forefathers. In the beginning of time, there were fallen angels, we are told. But even if it weren't there in Holy Writ, we might have learnt it of our own fears and misgivings. Sometimes I find myself looking at a young child with little short of awe, sir, knowing that within its mind is a scene of peace and paradise of which we older folk have no notion, and which will fade away out of it as life wears on, like the mere tabernacling of a dream. There was no trace of unction in his speech, though the phraseology might suggest it, and he smiled at me as if in reassurance. You see, sir, if I have any true notion in the matter, then I say heaven is dealing very gently with Dr. Pomfrey. He has gone back, and, I take it, his soul is elsewhere and at rest. He had come a pace or two nearer, and the candlelight was now cast a grotesque shadow in the hollows of his brows and cheekbones, silvering his long scanty hair. The eyes, dimming with age, were fixed on mine as if incommunicable entreaty. I was at a loss to answer him. He dropped his hands to his sides. The fact is, he looked cautiously about him. What I am now being so bold as to suggest, though it's a familiar enough experience to me, may put you in actual physical danger. But then, duty's duty, and the deed of kindness from a stranger to stranger, quite another matter. You seem to have come, if I may say so, in the nick of time. That was all. On the other hand, we can leave the building at once, if you are so minded. In any case, we must be gone well before the dark sets in. Even mere human beings are best not disturbed at any night work they may be after. The dark brings recklessness. Conscience cannot see as clear in the dark. Besides, I once delayed too long myself. There is not much of day left even now, though I see by the almanac there should be a slip of moon tonight, unless the sky is overclouded. All that I'm meaning is that our all in all, so to speak, is the calm, untrammeled evidence of the outer senses, sir. And there comes a time when one hesitates to trust one's own. I have read somewhere that it is only setting, the shape, the line, the fold, the angle of the lid, and so on, that gives its finer shades of meaning and significance to the human eye. Looking into his, even in that narrow and melancholy illumination, was like pondering over a gray, salt, desolated pool, such as sometimes neighbors the sea on the flat, dangerous coast. Perhaps if I had been a little less credulous or less exhausted, I should by now have begun to doubt this old creature's sanity. And yet, surely, at even the faintest contact with the insane, a sentinel in the mind sends up flares and warnings. The very landscape changes. There is a sense of insecurity. If, too, the characters inscribed by age and experience on a man's face can be evidence of goodness and simplicity, then my companion was safe enough. To trust in his sagacity was another matter. But then, there was All Hallows itself to take into account. The first glimpse from my green headland of this lowering yet lovely walls had been strangely moving. There are buildings, almost as though there were once copies of originals, now half forgotten in human mind, that have a singular influence on the imagination. Even now, in this remote candlelit room, immured between massive stones, the vast edifice seems to be gently and furtively fretting its impression on my mind. I glanced again at the old man, and he had turned aside as if to leave me unbiased to my own decision. How would a lifetime spent between these somber walls have affected me, I wondered. Surely it would be an act of mere decency to indulge their worn-out hermit. He had appealed to me. If I were 10 times more reluctant to follow him, I could hardly refuse. Not at any rate without risking a retreat as humiliating as that of architectural experts he had referred to, with my tail between my legs. I only wish I could hope to be of any real help. Okay, let me see. We're almost done. I just need to put my bookmark. He turned about, his expression changed as if at the coming of light. Why, then, sir, let us be gone at once. You are with me, sir. That was all I hoped and asked. And now there's no time to waste. He tilted his head to listen a moment, with that large, flat, shell-like ear of his which age alone seems to produce. Matches and candles, sir. He had lowered his voice to a whisper, but though we mustn't lose each other, you and me, I mean. Not, I think, a naked light. What I would suggest, if you have no objections, is your kindly grasping of my gown. There is a kind of streamer here, you see, as if made for the purpose. There will be a good deal of up and downing, but I know the building blindfold and, as you might say, inch by inch. And now that the bell ringers have given up ringing, it is more in my charge than ever. He stood back and looked at me with unfolded hands, a whimsical childlike smile on his aged face. I sometimes think to myself, I'm like the sentry, sir, in that play by William Shakespeare. I saw it, sir, years ago, on my only visit to London, when I was a boy. If ever there were a villain, for all his fine talk and all, commend me to that ghost. I see him yet. Whisper though it was, a short chirrup had come into his voice, like that of a cricket in a baker's shop. I took tight hold of the velvet tag of his gown. He opened the door, pressed the box of safety matches into my hand, himself grasped the candlestick, and then blew out the light. We were instantly marooned in the impenetrable darkness. Now, sir, if you would kindly remove your walking shoes, he muttered, close into my ear. We should proceed with less noise. I shan't hurry you. And please, to tug at the streamer if you need attention. In a few minutes, the blackness will be less intense. As I stooped down to loose my shoelaces, I heard my heart thumping merrily away. It had been listening to our conversation, apparently. I slung my shoes round my neck, as I had often done as a boy when going paddling, and we set out on our expedition. I have endured too often the nightmare of being lost and abandoned in the stony bowels of some strange, prodigious building to take such an adventure lightly. I clung, I confess, desperately to my lifeline, and we groped steadily onward, my guide ever and again turning back and muttering a warning of encouragement in my ear. Now I found myself steadily ascending, and then, in a while, feeling my way down flights of hollowly worn stone steps, and anon brushing along a gallery or corkscrewing up a newel staircase so narrow that my shoulders all but touched the walls on either side. In spite of the sepulchral chill in these bowels of the cathedral, I was soon suffocatingly hot, and the effort to see became intolerably fatiguing. Once, to recover our breath, we paused opposite in a slit in the thickness of the masonry, at which to breathe the tepid sweetness of the outer air. It was faint with the scent of wild flowers and cool of the sea. And presently, at a barred window, high overhead, I caught a glimpse of the night's first stars. We then turned inward once more. Oh my god, hi Mungo, you scared me. Cat break. Excuse me, sir. You're on my book. We then turned inward once more, ascending yet another spiral staircase, and now the intense darkness had thinned a little, the groined roof above us becoming faintly discernible. A fresher air softly fanned my cheek, and then trembling fingers groped over my breast, and, cold and bony, clutched my own. Dead still here, sir, if you please. I'll pet him. Hold on. Hi, Mungo. Yes. Oh, do you want to get in my lap? We don't have much to go. There's a drop of some 60 or 70 feet, a few paces on. Leave my book alone. I peered out across the abyss, conscious, as it seems, of this high, superincumbent weight of the noble fretted roof, only a small space now, immediately above our heads. As we approached the edge of the stony precipice, the gloom paled a little, and I guessed that we must be standing in some coign of the southern transept, for what little light the evening skies now afforded was clearer towards the right. On the other hand, it seemed the northern windows opposite us were most of them boarded up, or obscured in some fashion. Gazing out, I could detect scaffolding poles, like knitting needles, thrust out from the walls, and a balloon-like spread above a balloon-like spread of canvas above them. For the moment, my ear was haunted by what appeared to be the droning of an immense insect, but this presently ceased. I fancied it was internal only. "You will understand, sir," breathed the old man close behind me, and we still stood, grotesquely enough, hand in hand. "The scaffolding over there has been in position a good many months now. It was put up when the last gentleman came down from London to inspect the fabric, and there it's been left ever since. Now, sir, though I implore you to be cautious." I hardly needed warning. With one hand clutching my box of matches, the fingers of the other interlaced with my companion's, I strained every sense, and yet I could detect not the faintest stir or murmur under that wide-spreading roof, only a hush as profound as that which must I'm so sorry that you can hear Mungo throwing up. Gotta love a cat that just comes up for attention only to throw up. I will clean that later. And yet I could detect not the faintest stir or murmur under that wide-spreading roof, only a hush as profound as that which must reign in the royal chamber of the pyramid of Kepos? Faintly swirled in the labyrinths of my ear. How long we stayed in this position I cannot say, but minutes sometimes seem like hours, and then, without the slightest warning, I became aware of a peculiar, incessant vibration. It is impossible to give a name to it. It suggested the remote whirring of an enormous millstone, or that, though not definite pulsation, of revolving wings, or even the spinning of an immense top. In spite of his age, my companion apparently had ears as acute as mine. He had clutched me tighter, a full 10 seconds before I myself became aware of this disturbance of the air. I pressed closer. "Do you see that, sir?" Hydrate time as I ignore the fact that Mungo is eating his vomit. Thank you for reminding me, Kyo. I gazed and gazed and saw nothing. Indeed, even in what I seemed to hear, I might have been deceived. Nothing is more treacherous in certain circumstances, except possibly the eye, than the ear. It magnifies, distorts, and may even invent. As instantaneously as I had become aware of it, the murmur had ceased, and then, though I cannot be certain, it seemed the dingy and voluminous spread of canvas over there had perceptibly trembled, as if a huge, cautious hand had been thrust out to draw it aside. No time was given to me to make sure. The old man had hastily drawn me into the opening of the wall, through which we had issued, and we made no pause in our retreat until we had come again to the narrow slit of window which I have spoken of, and could refresh ourselves with less stagnant air. We stood here resting a while. "Well, sir," he inquired at last, in the same flat, muffled tones. "Do you ever pass along here alone?" I whispered. "Oh, yes, sir. I make it a habit to be the last to leave, and often the first to come, but I am usually gone by this hour." I looked close at the dim face in profile against the narrow oblong of the night. "It is so difficult to be sure of oneself," I said. "Have you ever actually encountered anything, near at hand, I mean?" "I keep a sharp lookout, sir. Maybe they don't think of me of enough importance to molest. The last rat, as they say. But have you?" I might myself have been communicating with the phantasmal genius loci of All Hallows, our muffled voices, this intense caution and secret listening, the slight breathlessness, as if at any instant one's heart were ready for flight. "But have you?" "Well, yes, sir," he said. "And in this very gallery." "They nearly had me, sir, but my good fortune, there is a recess, a little further on, stored up with some old fragments of carving from the original building, 6th century, so it said, stone capitals, heads and hands, and such like. I had had my warning, and managed to leap in there and conceal myself, but only just in time. Indeed, sir, I confess I was in such a condition of terror and horror I turned my back." "You mean you heard it but didn't look? And something came?" "Yes, sir. I seemed to be reduced to no bigger than a child huddled up there in that corner. There was a sound like clanging metal, but I don't think it was metal. It drew near at a furious speed, then passed me, making a filthy gust of wind. For some instants I couldn't breathe. The air was gone. And no other sound." "No other, sir, except out of the distant noise." like the sound of a stupendous kind of gibberish, a calling, or so it seemed. No human sound. The air shook with it, you see. I myself wasn't of any consequence, I take it, unless a mere obstruction in the way. But I have heard it said somewhere that the rarity of these happenings is only because it's a pain and torment and not any sort of pleasure for such beings, such apparitions, good or bad, to visit our outward world. That's what I have heard it said, though I can go no further. The time I'm telling you of was the early winter, November. There was a dense fog over the valley. I remember it eddied through that opening there into the candlelight like flowing milk. I never light up now, and if I may be forgiven the boast, sir, I seem to have almost forgotten how to be afraid. After all, in any walk of life, a man can only do his best, and that if there weren't such opposition and hindrances in high places, I should have nothing to complain of. What is anybody's life but marking time? Do you hear anything then, sir? His gentle, monotonous mumbling ceased, and we listened together. But every ancient edifice has voice and sounds of its own. There was nothing audible that I could put a name to, only what seemed to be a faint, perpetual stir or whir of grinding, such as, to one's overstimulated senses, the stablest stones set one on top of the other, with an ever slightly varying weight, and stress might be likely to make perceptible in a world of matter. Mungo, stop it. A world which, after all they say, is itself an unimaginable, rapidly rotating and under tyranny of time. No, I hear nothing, I answered, but please don't think I am doubting what you say. Far from it. You must remember I am a stranger, and that, therefore, the influence of the place cannot but be less apparent to me. And you have no help in this now? No, not now, but even at best of times, we had a small company hereabouts, and no money, not for any substantial outlay. And not even the boldest suggest making what's called a public appeal. It's a strange thing to me, but whenever the newspapers get a hold of anything, they turn it into a byword and a sham. Yet, how can they help themselves, with no beliefs to guide them and nothing to stay their mouths except about what for sheer human decency's sake, they daren't talk about? But then, who am I to complain? And now, he continued, with a sigh of utter weariness, if you are sufficiently rested, would you perhaps follow me onto the roof? It is the last visit I make, though by rights perhaps I should take in what there is of the tower, but I'm too old now for that. Clambering and climbing over naked beams and the ladders are not so safe as they once were. We had not far to go. The old man drew up a squat, heavily ironed door, and at the head of a flight of wooden steps. It was latched, but not bolted, and admitted us at once to the leaden roof of the building and to the immense amphitheater of evening. The last faint hues of sunset were fading in the west. The silver bright spica shared with the tilted crescent of the moon the serene lagoon-like expanse of sky above the sea. Even at this height, the air was audibly stirred with the lullaby of the low tide. The staircase by which we had come out was surmounted by a flat penthouse roof about 7 feet high. We edged softly along then, paused once more, to find ourselves all but tete-a-tete with the gigantic figures that stood sentinel at the base of the buttress to the unfinished tower. The tower was so far unfinished, indeed, as to wear the appearance of the ruinous, besides which would appear to be scars and stains of the fire were detachable on some of its stones, reminding me of the legend, which years before I had chanced upon, that this stretch of coast had more than once been visited centuries ago by pillaging Norsemen. The night was unfathomably clear and still. On our left rose the conical bluff of the headland, crowned with the solitary grove of trees beneath which I had taken refuge from the blinding sunshine that very afternoon. Its grasses were now hoary with the faintest moonlight. Far to the right stretched the flat, cold plain of the Atlantic, that enormous darkened looking-glass of space, only a distant lightship, ever and again stealthily signaling us with a lean, phosphoric finger from its outstretched reaches. The mere sense of that abysm of space, it was waste powdered with the stars of the Milky Way. the mere presence of the stony leviathan, on whose back we two humans now stood, dwarfed into insignificance beside these gesturing images of stone, were enough of themselves to excite the imagination. And whether matter of fact or pure delusion, this old verger's insinuations that the cathedral was now menaced by some inconceivable danger and assault had set my nerves on edge. My feet were numb as the lid they stood upon, while the tips of my fingers tingled as if a powerful electric discharge were coursing through my body. We moved gently on, the spare shape of the old man a few steps ahead, peering cautiously to the right and left of him as we advanced. Once, with a hasty gesture, he drew me back and fixed his eyes for a full minute on a figure at two removes, which was silhouetted by the moment against the starry emptiness, a forbidding thing enough, viewed in this vague luminosity, which seemed, in spite of the unmoving stare that I fixed on it, to be perceptibly stirring on its own wind-worn pedestal. But no, all's well, the old man had mutely signaled to me, and we pushed on, slowly and cautiously. Indeed, I had time to notice in passing that this particular figure held outstretched in its right hand a bent bow, and was crowned with a high, weather-worn stone coronet. One and all were frigid company. At last, we completed our circuit of the tower and had come back to the place we had set out from, and stood eyeing one another like two conspirators in the clear dusk. Maybe there was a tinge of incredulity in my face. "No, sir," murmured the old man. "I expect no other. The night is uncommonly quiet, and I've noticed that before. They seem to leave us at peace on nights of quiet. We must turn in again and be getting home." Until that moment I had thought of no more where I was to sleep or get food, nor had even realized how famished with hunger I was. Nevertheless, the notion of fumbling down again out of the open air into the narrow inward blackness of the walls from which we had just issued was singularly uninviting. Across these wide flat stretches of roof there was at least space for flight, and there were recesses for concealment. To gain a moment's respite, I inquired if I should have much difficulty in getting a bed in the village, and I had hoped the old man himself offered me hospitality. I thanked him, but still hesitated to follow for a moment. I was trying to discover what peculiar effect of dusk and darkness a moment before had deceived me into the belief that some small animal, a dog, a spaniel, I should have guessed, had suddenly and surreptitiously taken cover behind the stone buttress nearby. Mungo's on my mouse, so if you guys see movement, I'm sorry. But that apparently had been mere illusion. The creature, whatever it might be, was no barker at any rate. Nothing stirred now, and my companion seemed to have noticed nothing amiss. "You were saying," I pressed him, "that when restorations of the building were in contemplation, even the experts were perplexed by what they discovered?" "What did they actually say?" "Say, sir," our voices sounded as small and meaningless up here as those grasshoppers on a noonday meadow. "Examine that balustrade in which you were leaning against at this minute. Look at the gnawing and fretting, that furrowing above the lead. All that is honest wear and tear, constant weathering of the mere elements, sir, rain and wind and snow and frost. That's honest nature work. But compare it, if you please, with the St. Mark here, and remember, sir, these images were intended to be part and parcel of fabric, as you might say, sentries on a castle. Symbols, you understand." I stooped close under the huge gray creature of stone until my eyes were scarcely more than 6 inches from its pedestal, and unless the moon deceived me, I confess I could find not the slightest trace of fret or friction. Far from it. The stone had been grotesquely decorated in low relief with a gaping crocodile, a 2-headed crocodile, and the angles, nubs, and undulations of the creature were cut as sharp as with a knife and cheese. I drew back. "Now cast your glance upward, sir. Is that what you would call a saintly shape and gesture?" What appeared to represent an eagle was perched on the image's lifted wrist, an eagle resembling a vulture. The head, beneath it, is poised at an angle of defiance, its ears abnormally erect on the skull. The lean right forearm extended with pointing forefinger as if in derision. Its stony gaze was fixed upon the stars. Its whole aspect was hostile, sinister, and intimidating. I drew aside. The faintest puff of milk-warm air from over the sea stirred my cheek. "Aye, and so with one or two of the rest of them," the old man commented as he watched me. There are other wills than the Almighty's." At this, the pent-up excitement within me broke bounds. This nebulous, insinuatory talk. I all but lost my temper. "I can't for the life of me understand what you are saying," I exclaimed in a voice that astonished me with its shrill volume and sound in that intense, lofty quiet. "One doesn't repair in order to destroy." The old man met me without flinching. "No? Say you so? And why not? Are there not two kinds of change in this world? A building up and a breaking down? To give strength and endurance for evil or misguided purposes, would that be power wasted? If such was your aim? Why, isn't that true even of the human mind and heart? We here are on the outskirts, I grant. But where would you expect the enemy to show himself unless in the outer defenses? An institution may be beyond saving, but it may be being restored for a worse destruction, and 100 trumpeting voices would make no difference when the faith and life within is tottering to its fall. Somehow this muddle of metaphors reassured me. Obviously the old man's wits had worn a little thin. He was the victim of an intelligible but monstrous hallucination. "And yet you were taking it for granted," I expostulated, "that, if what you say is true, a stranger could be of the slightest help. A visitor, mind you, who hasn't been inside the doors of a church except in search of what is old and obsolete for years." The old man laid a trembling hand on my sleeve. The folly of it, with my shoes hanging like ludicrous millstones around my neck. "If you please," he pleaded, "have a little patience with me. I'm preaching at nobody. I'm not even hinting that them outside the fold, circumstantially speaking, aren't of the flock. All in good time, the Almighty's time, maybe, and with all due respect. It's from them, within, we have the most to fear. And indeed, believe an old man, I could never express the gratitude I feel. You have given me the occasion to unbosom myself, to make a clean breast, as they say. All Hallows is my earthly home, and, well, there, let us say no more. You couldn't help me, except only by your presence here. God alone knows who can." At that instant, an enormous dull rumble reverberated from the building, as if a huge boulder or block of stone had been shifted or dislodged in the fabric, a peculiar grinding, nerve-wracking sound, and for the fraction of a second the flags on which we stood seemed to tremble beneath our feet. The fingers tightened on my arm. "Come, keep close. We must be gone at once," the quavering old voice whispered. "We have stayed too long." But we emerged into the night at last, without mishap. The little western door above which the grinding head had welcomed me on my arrival admitted us to terra firma again, and we made our way up a deep, sandy track, bordered by clumps of hemp, agrimony, and fennel and hemlock, and vipers, buglass, and sea poppy blooming in the gentle dusk of night at our feet. We turned when we reached the summit of this sandy incline and looked back. All Hallows, vague and enormous, lay beneath us in its hollow, resembling some natural prehistoric outcrop of a sea-worn, rock-bound coast, but strangely human and saturnine. The air was mild as milk, a pool of faintest sweetness, gorse, bracken, heather, and not a rumor disturbed its calm, except only a furtive and stertorous sighings of the tide. But far out to sea and beneath the horizon, summer lightings were now in idle play, flickering into the sky like the unfolding of a signal, planet to planet, then gone. That alone, and perhaps to this feeble moonlight glinting on the ancient glass, may have accounted for the faint vitreous glare that seemed ever to gain and glitter across the window of the northern transept far beneath us. And yet how easily deceived is the imagination, this old man's talk still echoing in my ear. I could have vowed this was no reflection, but the glow of some light shining fitfully from within outwards. We paused together beside a flowering bush of fuchsia at the wicket gate leading into the small square of the country garden. You'll forgive me for mentioning it, but I make it a rule as far as possible to leave all my troubles and misgivings outside when I come home. My daughter is a widow, and not long in that sad condition, so I keep as happy as a face as I can on things. And yet, well, I wonder at times if a personal sacrifice isn't incumbent on them that have their object most at heart. I'd go out myself very willingly, sir, I can assure you, if there was any certainty in my mind that it would serve the cause. It would be little to me if, He made no attempt to complete the sentence. On my way to bed that night, the old man led me in on tiptoe to show me his grandson. His daughter watched me intently as I stooped over the child's cot with that bird-like solicitude which all mothers show in the presence of a stranger. Her salsman was of the fairness which most suggests the unreal. He had flung back his bedclothes as if innocence in this world needed no covering or defense, and lay at ease, the dews of sleep on lip, cheek, and forehead. He was breathing so quietly that not the least movement of shoulder nor narrow breast was perceptible. The lovely thing, I muttered, staring at him. Where is he now, I wonder? His mother lifted a face and smiled at me, with a drowsy, ecstatic happiness, then sighed. And from out of the distance there came the first prolonged whisper of a wind from over the sea. It was 11 by my watch. The storm, after the longest heat of the day, seemed to be drifting inland, but All Hallows, apparently, had forgotten to wind its clock. And that is the end of that story. We are a little bit past our normal stopping time, but that's okay, because I'd rather go past than have to scramble to find stories to read to make up the rest of the time. So I guess I chose adequately again today. Oh, Mungo got off of the mouse. Good job, Mungo, get off. But yes, we will see how I'm feeling tomorrow, but as per usual, you can always jump into the server and see what's going on in the little community that we have built together. I'll do my best to stream tomorrow, but I have been in a depressive episode that has been making it really hard for me to be social in any way, shape, or form. But I am trying. But I am quite tired, so we're gonna call it a night tonight. Thank you for stopping by. I love you guys so very much, and I will see you later.